Oh, how exciting to have arrived at the Paleogene Period. We're at the Paleogene Period, out of dinosaur territory, and thank God for that. It lasted from 66 to 23 million years ago. I know, the numbers are much smaller. Shit is starting to get real, i.e. modern. We are finally entering the Cenozoic Era, which is the start of the age of mammals, and is also the one that we currently live in. We are currently in the Cenozoic Era, so this is going to feel very close to home. It's going to feel very cozy. There's a chance this era is not as appealing to you. So far, this series has talked about strange specimens that would look like aliens on our planet today. Animals so massive, we can't even begin to imagine their true size. Shit like that doesn't really exist anymore, except for whales. And how many people have actually seen a full whale at once in real life? Not many. And it is true, the vibe of these videos is going to be different, but I think in ways that might be even more inspiring. And here's why. Mammals are what feel like home to us. They're some of the first animals we were introduced to as kids. Cats and dogs as pets. Lions, giraffes, elephants in toy sets and coloring books. We feel most connected to mammals because, also, we are mammals. And now, we get to see how these modern mammal groups emerged. From mere rat-like creatures to the new top predators. And the new unusual. You know how when you know someone, you feel much more connected to their side quests and the things that happen to them? Like, for example, and this is true, my cousin, Sam, ran 100 miles straight, and it took him 27 hours. He ran into the night, 27 hours straight to run 100 miles. When you hear that, you're like, damn. When I hear that, I'm like, what the fuck? Dude, that's my cousin. My cousin Sam ran 100 miles in 27 hours. That's the most insane thing in the entire world. What the fuck? Naturally, I feel more connected to the things he does than if he were a stranger. That's life. That's common experience. What is my point with this? I think the same phenomenon might happen here as we explore the mammalian explosion. These are your brethren, and these are you as well. We're gonna explore what the first elephants looked like. That's gonna be weird. What did the first whales look like? That's gonna be weird as well. The first dogs. What are some strange mammalian groups that got lost to time? You're gonna be like, what the fuck is all this? I think you're gonna like it. It's gonna be a new type of what the fuck. So, buckle up for all that and everything else in between. My name is Lindsay Nikole, and this is the history of life on Earth that we know of. Now that we've arrived at our current era, the Cenozoic, the structure is changing a bit. This is just a little FYI, a little PSA. We're adding a smaller division of time into the equation. Last time we covered the Mesozoic Era, which is broken into 3 periods: Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous. Each of those periods can be broken down into a smaller unit of time, called an epoch. Epoch, if you like the British pronunciation, epic, if you like the American. And I like epic, because it's more epic. Wow. Epoch. I haven't included the epochs in the episode so far because people don't really use them when talking about Paleozoic or Mesozoic animals, at least in a casual, prehistoric, conversational sense. They use the periods. For the Mesozoic, it's kind of 50-50. Like, some people do it, other people don't. Honestly, that was a personal decision of not being psychologically prepared to do that. And I thought it would also make the organization of the video too messy. It's no secret the Mesozoic was already kicking my ass, so I was not interested in adding another element. But now, in the Cenozoic, that is not the case. Epochs are the way to go. We're pretty close to modern times in the context of geologic time, so it's easier to think about things in chunks of like 10 million years instead of fucking 30. And these animals are more known by the epochs they lived in rather than the periods, if that makes sense. Like, there's a much better chance that you've heard that the Megalodon existed in the Miocene epoch rather than the Neogene Period, which is the episode next time. So, anyway, that is all to say. Now we're breaking the periods up into epochs throughout the video. I'll do a little general overview section, and then when we get to the stars of the show, most of the animals, we're gonna go epoch by epoch. In this video, in the Paleogene, there are 3. The Paleocene, devastatingly similar to the Paleogene, I know. The Eocene, and the Oligocene. P-E-O. Paleocene, Eocene, Oligocene. P-E-O. So, just hold on to that for later. And for now, we'll get the global conditions out of the way. We left off in the Cretaceous with the final splits of the modern continents. These were just drifting further and further apart. Generally, the climate went from warmer to cooler. About halfway through the period, because of the cooling, ice caps started forming at the poles, so sea levels decreased, the interior seaways dried up. Remember last time the flowering plants were popping the fuck off in what is known to science as the angiosperm terrestrial revolution, and to us as flower power time. That was still happening, obviously with a pretty big blip from mass extinction, but that paved the way for flowering plants to continue being innovative, trying new shit out. So, flower power time was still in full swing until like halfway through this period. One of the products of this continued revolution was the appearance of palms. We love palms. Last time I showed you my new palm leaf tattoo, and I have written in my notes to give you an update, and the update is there has been no update. I still have not gone back, and I still won't for a while. So, palms showed up. but they have their roots in the Cretaceous. But obviously, the extinction rocks their shit. So, the Paleogene is when we start to see some of the more modern palm groups we know and love today. Another product of the flower revolution was the appearance of cacti, which I actually have. I have one. Hold on. This is a cactus inside of a cat. A cactus. So I'll just hold it here for ambiance. The fossil record of cacti is garbage. So for a long time, their evolution was completely unknown. But now, recent genetic studies suggest they originated somewhere in South America around the middle of this period, most likely from scrubby trees that lived in an area that was warm with dry seasons, and so evolved traits to help with the occasional dryness, to help hoard water. And then later, some started to violently hold water with the development of thorns. If you think violently is too strong a word to use, imagine falling down on this. Matter of fact, go spend some time in Arizona and get back to me. All right, the last thing about plants before we move on. It's worth mentioning that some of the earliest carnivorous plants were thought to have evolved during this time for a while. They've evolved multiple times within angiosperms. But turns out they might have actually evolved in the Cretaceous. At least the earliest possible carnivorous plant fossil dates to the Cretaceous, called Archaeamphora. So just so we're all keeping track, the earliest carnivorous plant and fungus fossils are from the Cretaceous. The Cretaceous was a fucking hellscape. So, anyway, we'll focus on the now, Paleogene. The flowering plants are still exploding, which means the insects were still exploding as well. Especially the group that includes some of the cutest insects, in my opinion. That's right, bitches. The weevils. Over 500 species of weevils have been described from the Paleogene alone. Dude, they're just all over the Paleogene fossil record, like white on rice. It's really not that surprising if you think about it. Weevils are beetles, and beetles are abundant as fuck. 25% of all discovered animal species are beetles, which amounts to over 350,000 species of just beetles. That is a shit ton of beetles. So, 500 species of weevils in the Paleogene? Fucking whatever. Piece of cake. All right. With the exception of weevils, because they were just abundant in the larger time frame, we're now going to turn our attention to the animals in the context of the epochs. Let's start off with the Paleocene, the first epoch of the Paleogene, which lasted from 66 to 56 million years ago. Quick 10 million years of time. This is obviously the epoch that immediately followed the mass extinction, so it was very much a time of recovery. Species were quickly evolving to fill ecosystem roles that the extinction kicked to the curb, and so turns out this was also the beginning of many modern groups that we know and love today, as well as the start of some heinous groups. And as you would already expect, I'm going to give you a little mix of both. Let's start off with the fan favorite, the sharks. Turns out two of the most iconic shark lineages first appeared in the Paleocene. Carcharodon, also known as the white sharks, and Otodus, also known as the megatooths, or megateeth. The megatoothed sharks. The relationship between these two groups is questionable. Some scientists think they should be placed in the same genus, others think they should stay put. It's kind of difficult to pinpoint since the vast majority of fossil evidence they have to work with is just piles and piles of teeth. Teeth on teeth on teeth. So there's a couple species that might be related to both, or one, or none, really whatever, you name it. Paleocarcharodon, possibly related to or ancestral to the white sharks, including the iconic great white. They were much smaller based on the size of their teeth. Also, by the way, Carcharodon means jagged tooth. Paleocarcharodon means ancient jagged tooth. There is a similarity in the jaggedness of the teeth, but there's uncertainty if they're blood related like that. So, for now, they are called ancient jagged tooth instead of today's jagged tooth. We're just gonna leave it at that. Next, this one is a bit more understood. Otodus obliquus places the earliest species in the lineage that would eventually lead to Megalodon in the next episode. Obliquus was much smaller than Megalodon at like 26 feet long, obviously still a big ass shark. For a long time, it was thought the development of some of these massive sharks was influenced by the appearance of marine mammals, like early whales, sea cows, etc., skyrocketing them to the top of the food chain. You can tell where extinct animals sat in the food chain by the amount of nitrogen they have in their teeth. Places in the food chain are also known as trophic levels, by the way. So if you're at the top of the food chain, you might be at like trophic level 4 or 5. Trophic level 1 would be plants that make their own food. The next level might be a small fish or crustacean. Next one, a larger fish that ate that fish. Next one is an even larger fish that ate that other fish that ate that other fish, and so on. Nitrogen is passed through each exchange, because animals get nitrogen from their food, so you can tell what their trophic level was in general by the levels of nitrogen in their teeth. And so, scientists did this for Otodus obliquus, and it turns out their nitrogen levels were already high as fuck, even before marine mammals showed up in the water. So they were already tops of the food chains, probably just thriving since the marine reptiles in the Mesozoic got booted. They were ready to go immediately. I think that's very on brand for them. All right, next up are the crocodilians. If they didn't exist today, it would probably shock you that they were able to make it out of not one, but two mass extinctions, Triassic and the Cretaceous. And they pretty much look exactly the same. They just have the ideal body form. They're surprisingly adaptable. They can go long periods without food, like up to a year. In some cases, a year a crocodilian can go. They'll eat whatever the fuck and do whatever the fuck to get shit done. It's respectable. And also horrifying. There's a few specific crocodilian groups that have been found on both sides of the extinction layer in the fossil record. So, let me introduce you to them. First off, the Rachosaurs. Alive from 72 million years ago, so like 8 million years after the extinction, and then into the Paleogene. They were fairly big for crocodilians, with some species getting to like 30 feet long. They had very long, slender snouts, kind of like modern gharials. Initially, they were thought to be the ancestors of gharials, but that turned out to be false, based on recent genetic evidence. Next, the Dinosaurs. They had massive tails, and were kind of all over the place. They ranged from like 6 to 30 feet long, some were semi-aquatic, some terrestrial, some stayed near the shore, some lived in the open ocean. They could do it all. They also existed from the Cretaceous into the Paleogene. And next, Sebecids. Highly specialized crocodilians with flat, triangular-shaped heads, less teeth than you'd expect, and legs made for walking. Yes, another terrestrial crocodilian. This is what pit bulls look like to me, and that's a good thing. I like pit bulls. Unlike their brethren I just introduced you to, the Sebecids not only made it out of the Cretaceous, but also the Paleogene, all the way into the time of the first hominids, which is coming in the next episode. So, stay tuned for that. Alright, next is another group we know and absolutely love today that has their origins in the Paleocene. The penguins. Everyone loves a penguin. They are so cute, and also a little bit gay sometimes. And the earliest member of this darling lineage is known as Waimanu. About 3 feet tall and alive in what is now New Zealand. They had a solid mix of characteristics, clearly on the way to the penguin body form we know and love today. They were flightless and used their wings for diving. They had stubby feet, very penguin things. But they also had long, narrow bills, and an overall body form more similar to a common loon. Also, sidebar, I found out while researching that Canadians have a loon on their dollar coin, and because of that, they call those coins loonies. I like that a lot. I think that's very nice. Canada's just very whimsical, you know? I like it. They have their loonies and their maple syrup. They say sorry all the time. They kind of half committed to French. I like it. I like it a lot. With shit evolving at rapid speed, you probably wouldn't be surprised to find out that soon after the earliest penguins stepped onto the scene, some of them got big as fuck. Allow me to introduce you to Kumimanu, one of the largest penguins to ever exist, that we know of. Fossil evidence suggests they got to almost 6 feet tall. 6 feet tall, dude. When I was a kid, I thought emperor penguins got that big, because I had no gauge for size, you know? Everything was 6 feet tall to me as a kid. And I thought penguins named emperor penguins would be really big too. Like, this to me looked like an average family with a 6 foot tall father. But I also thought quicksand would be a bigger issue in my life than it is now, so what the fuck did I know? Another quick one to note is Ogigoptinks. Ogigoptinks. We'll call them Goptinks. The earliest owls that we know of. They're only known from fossilized foot bones, which are very owl-like in nature. So, more research must be done. Now moving on to something much less whimsical. Yes, the birds were diversifying to replace the roles of their avian ancestors and non-avian dinosaur relatives. But you might immediately assume never got worse than something like a modern-day ostrich. But unfortunately, or fortunately if you like chaos, that is far from true. A group emerged that feels like the dinosaurs rose from the dead for one last shot at domination. Today we call them terror birds. And for good reason. They're a group of fast and extremely predatory flightless birds that ended up dominating South America for 60 million years. They range from 3 to 10 feet tall and were defined by a large, sharp beak that could be used like a pickaxe. Some species are estimated to have reached 35 miles per hour. Scientists know they first appeared in the Paleocene, but their fossil record isn't that great. So I wanted to introduce them to you here, but we're gonna pick up on them in the Eocene, where I can show them to you in the way they deserve. For now, I can introduce you to Gastornis, which is not a terror bird, but a terrible bird nonetheless. Gastornis, to me, is a terrible bird for a couple reasons. 1, they look heinous. They got to 6.5 feet tall, couldn't fly, but probably ran very fast. Unsettling, like an ostrich, which are also unsettling. And 2, they've historically been difficult to pin down in a lifestyle context. Early interpretations said they were the size of a horse, aquatic, swam like a swan, stood on one leg. They were first portrayed in media as apex predators that ate mammals. Early feeding style studies in the 90s backed this up, saying they had bite forces large enough to crush bone. But newer studies say the opposite, that they were instead herbivores, that they used that bite force to eat nuts and thick-skinned fruits. That is where they currently sit for now. Not the worst thing in the world, but still unsettling, I must say. So shit was chugging along. Groups were recovering and experimenting with new body sizes, lifestyles, etc. But so far I haven't truly introduced you to any certified terrestrial predators. No need to fret, I'm gonna do that now. Snakes. We left off with them finally losing their limbs in the Cretaceous. And the mass extinction really left room for them to step the fuck up, and gave rise to the largest predator on the planet following the extinction of the dinosaurs. That we know of. Titanoboa, who was the largest snake ever discovered. Until just this year. Used to be a that we know of thing that I said, but now it's not true anymore. A new contender was found. That is also in this video. And we'll get to them in a bit. But for now, let's focus on Titanoboa. They could get to 42 feet long, about the length of a semi-truck trailer, and 3 feet thick. They were so wide they would have had a hard time squeezing through your bedroom door if they were still alive today. And if one slithered past you right now, it would come up to your waist, while completely flat on the ground. Thick-ass snake. Like boas today, Titanoboa likely used constriction to kill their prey. Probably powerful to pop your eyeballs out like a cartoon character. And yes, if you were alive at the same time as Titanoboa, they would have easily seen you as a snack, alongside the crocodilians, fish, and really anything else they had an appetite for. They fucking owns the Paleocene. They were not to be messed with. Since snakes are reptiles, that means they are also sauropsids. Remember earlier in the series, I talked about this tug of war that has existed between synapsids, the group that includes mammals, and sauropsids, the group that includes birds, reptiles, and crocodilians. The tug of war started back in the Permian and still exists to this day. In the Permian, synapsids were on top, with species like Dimetrodon, Cotylorhynchus, Gorgonopsians, etc. Then the Great Dying happened. In that period of recovery, the sauropsids had the upper hand, and they evolved to shit, obviously. All the craziest species in the Mesozoic were sauropsids. But now the tide is turning. Yes, I just showed you a heinous sauropsid from just after the mass extinction, but I haven't even touched on the mammals yet. They were starting to pop off quickly. As I said, this is the age of the mammals. So let's start off with the most significant to our own lineage, Purgatorius. They represent the start of a huge chapter in our lineage, as some of the earliest primates that we know of. Very unassuming. I know. They look like just another rat. I swear, this is not what the whole section is going to be. Changes happened quickly, but I would be a traitor to our own kind if I didn't mention Purgatorius. So, just stay with me. Purgatorius fossils first appear about 100,000 years after the extinction, which is fucking quick on the geologic timescale. Mass extinction, the rat survived, and boom, primates start getting to work. Fossil evidence suggests they were climbers, living life in the trees, with extremely flexible feet, and they also ate plants and insects. Also, they weighed 3.5 ounces. Teeny, teeny, tiny. We'll get back to the primates later, so for now, just know they're making moves. The next one I want to introduce you to is another one that showed up just after the mass extinction, but you might have never heard of them. They have been lost to the wicked hands of time. The Pantodonts. At first glance, unassuming. I know. They look like if you took every mammal you've ever heard of, mixed them up, and took the average of them. They look like every mammal and also none of them. They look like mush. I don't like my picture up there, you know? What the fuck is this? Has the spots of a cheetah, not the tear marks of a cheetah. It's not a leopard. It's just a generic African big cat, I guess. Anyway, the Pantodonts were a group of herbivores. Turned out to be some of the largest mammals to evolve immediately after the extinction. One of the largest was Bear Lambda, the heaviest pantodont that we know of, with a weight of 1,400 pounds. Dude, this is a big deal. Remember, before, everything was a rat. Rat-sized, rodent-sized, maybe badger-sized. This is humongo. They had an easy lifestyle, chewed on soft vegetation, might have used their tail to support them on their hind limbs while they reached up into the trees for more delicious snacks. They seem like they would have been cute like panda bears, you know? I would say that's a safe assumption to make. This next one, though, I would say is the complete opposite of that. Coryphodon. This looks like a modern-day lab accident. I don't like their teeth at all. They seem to have lived a semi-aquatic lifestyle, chewing on aquatic vegetation. I find it very haunting when an animal that eats plants has gnarly canines like that. It's extremely unsettling. They were anywhere between 750 to 1,300 pounds, and that's all I have to say about them. The last pantodont I want to show you is one that I like a little bit more. Titanoides. Still herbivorous, still with the insane canines, but I feel a little more comfortable with this form. They were also smaller, like 300 pounds, so that feels more manageable. All right, moving on from the pantodonts to a group you will be a lot more familiar with. Another fan favorite, the Proboscideans, which today is represented by the elephants, named such for their proboscis, the trunk. Proboscideans proboscis. One of the earliest representatives is Erytherium, which, as you can see, did not have a trunk. This was pre-proboscis. It was something that would evolve over time within the group. They were also very small, like 15 pounds, which I think is just darling. Another early relative is Phosphatherium, same kind of shit going on, but a little bit bigger, at 20 to 30 pounds. Now you might be thinking, Lindsay, these look nothing like elephants, and you said it yourself. So how do scientists know that they were even related to elephants at all? I have one word for you: teeth. The teeth always tell the tale. Elephant teeth are extremely specialized. They look like fucking high-traction shoe soles. And also, their tusks evolved from teeth. Urotherium and Phosphotherium have dentition that's clearly on the way to this more specialized look. Also other skull and jaw similarities and other scientific business. The elephant lineage evolved alongside a massive radiation that took place within mammals during this time. The ungulates, or the hoofed animals. You know a lot of ungulates today, like horses, rhinos, zebra, antelope, giraffes, things with hooves. There is a lot of diversity today within the ungulates. Elephants used to be classified as like a separate group within ungulates, but that turned out to be false. Genetic and fossil geographic evidence actually places them very far away from the ungulates. Now they have their own group called Afrotheria, which includes aardvarks, manatees, sea cows, etc. I hope my wording wasn't confusing. I think it was, because I said they evolved alongside them, and that's just not true. Elephants used to be thought of as ungulates, and now they're very much not. But it can kind of be confusing because, like, rhinos and hippos are ungulates, and elephants very much exist in ecosystems with a shit ton of ungulates, but they're not ungulates. Period. Just ungulates in spirit and morale. Anyway, the ungulates. In general, we think of them as herbivores. In documentaries, they are the prey. The springbok escaping the lion. The giraffe minding its business. That was not always the case. As always, nature never gives shit to you straight, and especially not right after a mass extinction. So, allow me to introduce you to the Mesonychids, a group of carnivorous ungulates that were alive through the Paleogene. They came in a variety of shapes and sizes, with smaller ones like Hapalodectes, who weighed only 2 pounds, and larger ones like Pachyena, whose name means thick hyena, like a hyena, but even heavier, more like a bear. Stay tuned because the ungulates are only going to get more heinous. When you think of mammalian predators today, you probably think of lions, wolves, hyenas, bears, etc. Turns out they all belong to the same group that made their first appearance in the Paleocene, carnivora. Any animals within this group are called carnivorans, which is a bit confusing and also easy at the same time. Carnivores are animals that eat meat. Sharks are carnivores, but they are not carnivorans. Carnivorans in group Carnivora include many carnivores today, but also some animals that are not carnivores, like pandas. They eat plants, but are carnivorans. They evolved from carnivores. Also, weasels. You would probably think of them as closer to rodents, but they are carnivorans and eat a lot of rodents. I'm kind of rambling now. All in all, as always, nature never gives shit to you straight. Mostly because our understanding and classification of nature is our own fucking fault, and we have nothing to blame but ourselves for the confusion. So, anyway, the earliest carnivorans appeared during the Paleocene and looked like a bunch of weasels. These early carnivorans and their relationship to other carnivorans, the ones alive today, once again lies in the teeth. They have a set of carnassial teeth, which are way in the back, and are sharp to cut meat and tendon. Another group of carnivores, closely related to carnivorans but not true carnivorans themselves, were the creodonts. They're first thought to be the ancestors to carnivora because they also have a set of carnassial-looking teeth, but turns out this was just another classic case of convergent evolution. They developed differently, so likely closely related but not as one. Creodonts were carnivorous as fuck, and as time went on, came in a variety of shapes and sizes. The classic Paleocene one is Paleonyctus. Kinda looked like a wolverine. They had jaws suitable to crush bones like a chip. There will be more creodont updates to come as we move into the next epoch. I want to mention real quick, there was an event that kind of distinguishes the Paleocene epoch from the Eocene. It's called the Paleocene-Eocene Thermal Maximum, or PETM. PETM. It was a period of rapid global warming that lasted for about 200,000 years, possibly triggered by volcanoes. There was a huge release of carbon into the atmosphere that resulted in a temperature spike of somewhere between 9 to 14 degrees Fahrenheit. A lot of deep-sea microorganisms went extinct because of this. There were a lot of general changes in different animal groups, and as you will see, a lot of new appearances. So now we're in the Eocene epoch, which lasted from 56 to 34 million years ago. Obviously, the start of the epoch was hot as fuck, and it got cooler as time went on, so still following along the trend of getting cooler overall throughout the Paleogene period. And like always, we're gonna go group by group, starting off with a couple invertebrates that I found that I think that you will like. First off, a giant snail. How the fuck do you pronounce that? Campanile? Never would have guessed that. Alright, if you say so. Campanile giganteum. The size of a small child. Their shells got up to 3 feet long and looked like an acid trip. They look like wizards ready to sell you potions with their cone-shaped, spirally designed shells. Also worth mentioning, they've mostly been found in France, which to me checks out. They look extremely French. And next, a giant ant called Titanomyrma. The queens could get to about 2.5 inches long, which, yes, is relatively small. But for an ant, nuh-uh. That is a big-ass fucking ant. And they're considered the largest ants to ever exist that we know of. These ants probably lived in forests and were likely predators, using their massive size to hunt other insects and maybe even small vertebrates. A godforsaken thought, if you ask me. Moving on to amphibians, with another world record of the largest frog to ever exist. that we know of. But it doesn't have a name yet. It's thought to be in the genus Calyptocephalala, which is still chugging along to this day with species like the helmeted water toad and the wide-mouthed toad. And the humerus, the funny bone of this fossil, is larger than Beelzebuthos. So, you do the math. It would have lived near the coast of what is now Chile. That's really all I have to tell you, because I don't think there's been any updates on this discovery since then. So, here's the paper if you want to check it out. That's all I have to offer you. Moving on to the reptiles with yet another world record. Like I mentioned, the one that might knock Titanoboa off its throne. Announced just this year in 2024, allow me to introduce you to Vasuki indicus, potentially the largest snake to ever exist. That we know of. The remains indicate a body size somewhere between 36 to 50 feet long, so potentially surpassing Titanoboa by the length of an average surfboard. There's still a lot of mysteries since this was literally just announced. Vasuki was likely an ambush predator that used constriction to kill their prey. What exactly that prey was, though, is unknown for now. Alright, moving on to the birds. Hi! I have another prehistoric penguin to show you. I know you were hoping for another one. This is Inkayaku, a big penguin, about 5 feet tall. In 2008, scientists came across their first fossil specimen in Peru, and it was unbelievably well preserved. The fossil was nearly complete, and had the first fossilized penguin feathers ever found. The fossil dated to about 36 million years ago, so only about 15 million years after the first penguins like Waimanu. Despite this, Inkayaku already had developed modern penguin features, like paddle-like wings and classic penguin-shaped feathers. Most birds have specifically shaped flying feathers for flying. Since penguins don't fly, they don't have those. Their flying feathers are just more regular feathers. That's what Inkayaku had, was just more regular feathers. Along with the well-preserved feathers were, you guessed it, melanosomes. They gave researchers insight onto the penguin's coloration. Obviously, penguins today are pretty much just black and white. That was not the case for Inkayaku. No, they're more of a gray and reddish brown, as you can see in this reconstruction. Still lovely if you ask me. Now let's move on to the less lovely, and pick up where we left off with terror birds. I mentioned that they dominated South America for about 60 million years, but I want to turn our attention to a different location real quick, because just this year, in May of 2024, scientists discovered 2 toe claws that belong to a massive terror bird in Antarctica. They're similar in size to a more well-known species called Phorusrhacus longissimus, which stood about 8 feet tall. They're the first evidence of terror birds existing at all in Antarctica, so the fact that they were there in the first place, and this big, completely shifts our understanding of Antarctic ecosystems in the Paleogene. They were likely apex predators, like other terror bird species are everywhere else, pecking marsupials and ungulates to death. One of the worst ways to go, if you ask me. Another terror bird found in an unusual place. Levacatavis africana, found in, you guessed it, Africa. Specifically Algeria. Scientists are unsure if this species is a true terror bird, because if it is, it makes no sense. Africa was very far away from South America at this period of time in the Paleogene, like at least 600 miles away at the closest point of ocean in between. The likelihood of a group of flightless terror birds migrating there is pretty slim. They would have had to raft there, floating on some sort of surface, most likely not a boat or a raft, or the ancestors of the group must have migrated much earlier, when they were able to fly at least a little bit, and were also much smaller. Or it's just another classic case of convergent evolution, and is in fact not a terror bird. There's no conclusion reached to this as of now. And just for your records, Levacatavis likely would have stood about 5 feet tall, so probably right about here on me. Other than that, the South American species were pretty small compared to that, about 3 feet tall. But no need to fret, this is just the beginning of a long Latino nightmare. You'd never guess by the way that I say Latino that I'm Puerto Rican. Alright, that's the end of Eocene birds and sauropsids. Now we're on to the synapsids, the mammals. Let's start off with the most bird-like mammal, the bats. Yes, bats appeared during this time. The scientific grouping bats belong to is called Chiroptera, and very early on in their evolution, bats looked extremely bat-like a Chiropterus, one of the earliest bats that we know of. They were from the early Eocene, and despite their appearance, don't show evidence of being able to echolocate, which is just a series of different skeletal features, such as this coiled inner ear tube called a cochlea, which is enlarged in echolocating bats. A little bit later, though, came Paleochiropteryx from the Middle Eocene. Some of their fossils from Germany are extremely well preserved, with traces of fur, wing membranes, skin that makes up the wing, and also, you guessed it, melanosomes, which indicate they were brown, like you'd expect with a typical bat, and show possible evidence of echolocation already. They had the enlarged cochlea and had a stomach filled with fossilized insects. Just more typical bat shit. So this was all to say that bats were doing typical bat shit pretty much right when they became bats. Alright, moving on to carnivora, who had a lot of updates. Like I said, when you think of carnivorans, your brain will probably go right to big cats and wolves, the cat and the dog, and cat dog somewhere in between, which, great show, by the way, and pretty twisted if you ask me. They don't make shit like this anymore. Nevertheless, carnivora. the cat and the dog. These are actually the two main body forms the carnivorans started splitting up into during the Eocene. The dog-like caniforms and the cat-line feliforms. Today, all carnivorans are split up this way. On the cat side, you've got cats, obviously. Usa. Hyenas. That one might be surprising. They look like a solid mix of both, but this is about relatedness and coincidental overlap in body form, just the way the cookie crumbled. Also mongooses, meerkats, etc. That's the cat side. On the dog side, you've got dogs, which came from wolves, and also foxes, bears, weasels, badgers, skunks, raccoons, walruses, etc. I know, these bitches are all over the place. That split between the feliforms and the caniforms started happening in the Eocene. And one of the first true canins, the true dog family, appeared as well. Hesperocyon. If you have a domestic dog in your home, you can thank Hesperocyon for that, which is kind of the more primitive form. They're thought to be the ancestor to the true dog family, like I said. So the wolves, foxes, wild dogs, etc. At the same time, the cat forms were developing too, but not in the way that you'd expect. The true cat family wouldn't appear until the next epoch that we know of, but you would never guess that by looking at the next group on the list, the Nimrabids, which looked like early saber-toothed cats, but were not saber-toothed cats or even true cats at all. Yes, they were on the cat side of the split, but had their own thing going on. Because of this, they're often called the false saber-toothed cats. It's like the crab thing all over again. As you will come to see throughout this era, the cat form copied itself to shit. So now we've got carcinization, croconization, and cactinization. Why do I didn't say that croconization line before. So where the fuck is that? One of the more well-known Nimrabids from the Eocene was Hoplophonius, which ranged from leopard to jaguar in size, and had more robust, stout bodies compared to big cats alive today. They also had a plantigrade stance, meaning the whole sole of their foot was on the ground. Like us, we have a plantigrade stance. Bears do as well. Cats alive today have a why is that the hardest fucking thing to say out loud? Cats alive today have a digitigrade stance. Just their toe bones and the ball of their foot are on the ground. Dogs do that as well. And then there's a third stance, the unguligrade stance, which is done by, you guessed it, ungulates, where just their toes are on the ground. Foot bones just evolved into different forms over time. Anyway, Hoplophonius seems to have been a hypercarnivorous ambush predator that used their false saber teeth to deliver fatal bites to their prey. Some were apex predators of their ecosystems and were some of the most advanced carnivores of the time that we know of. Ahead of the next group on the list, the Amphicyonids, also known as the bear dogs, which were not bears or dogs, but had traits similar to both, earning them the nickname bear dogs. They would live on to be vicious, formidable predators, but had humble beginnings in the Eocene, mostly like 10 pounds, fed on small mammals and birds. So we'll check back in with them later on. All right, next up is Hyenodon, which was not a hyena, and actually not even a carnivoran at all, but they were carnivorous as fuck. There are many different species that came in a variety of sizes. The largest got to the size of a modern bear. One of the more well-known species, Hyenodon horridus, was smaller, but still quite horridus. They had extremely powerful jaws, capable of snapping their prey's neck right in half. They ate whatever they wanted, which mostly turned out to be a variety of ungulates. So, let's move on to the ungulates. I mentioned in the Paleocene that the ungulates were about to go through a massive radiation. That really becomes clear in the Eocene. Just like the carnivorans, the ungulates split up into two main lineages, the Artiodactyls, or the even-toed ungulates, and the Perissodactyls, or the odd-toed ungulates. Let's start off with the odd-toed ungulates, which are named such because they generally have 1 or 3 toes on each foot. A single toe sounds heinous. Yes, but in practice, that is a horse's hoof. And speaking of horses, they first appeared in the Eocene. One of the earliest horses is Heracitherium. They were very small, about 2.5 feet long, and did not have the single toe hooves yet, but were still early horses nonetheless. A later one is Mesohippus, from the late Eocene. Still no single toe hooves, but they had elongated foot bones for improved running, more setback eyes on the skull. They were a bit larger and were developing more specialized horse teeth. Horses are on the move. Today, the odd-toed ungulates also include rhinos, which have 3 toes on each foot. And this next one on the list is definitely rhino in spirit, but not true. Rhino, Megacerops, known for their iconic protrusion on their snout, and one of the largest terrestrial animals of the Eocene that we know of. They were massive, at about 8 feet tall and 15 feet long, so closer in size to today's African elephant than a rhino. I think they look absolutely sick. But my favorite animals of the Eocene are the next group. We've talked a lot about nature being on acid for many times in Earth's history. The entire Paleozoic era was a bender. While things seem to finally be calming down a bit, more stable and mature, the next group is an exception, the Colica Echithers, considered one of the strangest mammals of all time. They look like a child made up an animal. They were kind of like a mix between a gorilla and a horse. They definitely had the equestrian evolutionary relationship, but walked on their knuckles like a gorilla and reached up into the tree branches for vegetation. Like many other groups, the early Eocene forms were not their prime. They would live on into the Ice Age, so I will keep giving you updates on them as we go on. Alright, so that was the odd-toed ungulates. Now let's move on to the even toes. They walk on two toes, which is like the classic antelope hoof. I have two notable groups to introduce you to, starting off with the more tame. Pobrotherium, an early member of the camel family. That's right, bitches, we got camels in the Eocene too. They're about the size of a goat, and that's really all there is to it. Turns out, they were a mere snack to the next one on the list. Yeah, a predator on the ungulate list. And holy shit, Andrewsarchus, the largest carnivorous land mammal to ever exist, that we know of. And they walked on primitive hooves. They were no fucking joke. They were about 12 feet long and 6 feet tall at the shoulder. At the shoulder, dude. Their skulls alone were 3 feet long, and they weighed up to 2,000 pounds. Probably able to target species like Megacerops, if they wanted to. A wicked beast, if you ask me. Alright, now let's check in with the Afrotherians, which today includes elephants, manatees, and more. So let's start off with the elephant lineage, the early Proboscideans. Boom. Moratherium. This is the most devastating side profile I've ever seen. Despite this catastrophe, this is another step closer to the elephants we know and love today, from our perspective. To them, this was their final form. They didn't even know they looked like this. Technically, this isn't a direct ancestor to elephants. This is more of a little offshoot, but part of the legacy nonetheless. They're about the size of a tapir, which I guess doesn't look much better. But they make it work. They're more ugly cute. Maybe Moratherium looked more like this and the reconstructions just don't give them enough credit. I don't know. As you can see, they were kind of on their way to the trunk, with a flexible upper lip. An analysis of oxygen and carbon isotopes in their teeth suggests a plant-based, semi-aquatic lifestyle. One that was much more on the way to elephants was Phiomia. They're a bit larger and also had a short, but still valid, trunk. Also some pretty gnarly tusks, reminiscent of the later Platybelodon, which we've talked about on this channel and we'll get into in the next period. So for now, we'll move on to an unusual one on the list, Arsinoitherium, who, just like Diabloceratops, also looks like they listen along the shore. They're about 10 feet long and had two massive facial horns. This is a godforsaken image. Apparently, they were supposed to appear in King Kong in 1933, which is what this is from, but it didn't make the final cut. I feel like this qualifies as antique shit that I have a problem with, and it checks out because it's 1933. So, another big step for Afrotherians was the transition to water with the group Sirenia, which today is represented by manatees, dugongs, and sea cows. One of the oldest Sirenians that we know of is Pisiocyrus, which kind of looks like a cross between a hippo and a manatee. They had adaptations for both aquatic and terrestrial ways of life, so probably split their time pretty evenly between their two properties. Later came Protosiren, who had more aquatic characteristics, as you can see, but was still not fully committed to the ocean. By the late Eocene, there were fully aquatic species like Eosiren. When you think of Sirenians, it's not surprising to find out that they're closely related to elephants. This looks like an aquatic elephant. But there's one group of marine mammals that has Eocene ancestors that, at first glance, you'd never expect. They're the marine mammals. Yeah, the whales. They evolved from a dog-sized artiodactyl that was alive in the Eocene. I know I said I only had 2 artiodactyl species to show you before, and that is still true. Because I'm passing the evolution of whales to a good friend of mine, Ben, who happens to be an expert in the field. You're probably familiar with his channel, where he does tons of paleo updates and spotlights, and has not been afraid to take on the Spinosaurus shit show. He actually just got his master's a few weeks ago, focusing on the evolution of whales and comparing their anatomy to that of ichthyosaurs. So he is literally the best person to turn to for this section of the video. So, I'm gonna hand it over to him now. Ben, take it away.
The evolution of the cetaceans, from land-living ancestors that looked like tiny deer things to the biggest animals that have ever lived, is one of the most spectacular evolutionary transformations in the history of life that we know of. So we couldn't talk about the Paleogene without taking a quick detour to follow the journey of whale evolution. The Paleogene period saw the appearance of the hoofed mammals, the ungulates, and within them arose the even-toed ungulates called artiodactyls. This group quickly became very diverse and remains so today, but one lineage within the artiodactyls took things in a very different direction from the mostly terrestrial lifestyles of all the other members of the group. About 50 million years ago, a little artiodactyl species called Indohyus appeared. Known from fossils found in India, which at that time bordered the shrinking Tethys Sea, the cat-sized Indohyus was mostly terrestrial but seems to have spent quite a bit of time in the water, with dense limb bones to keep it submerged and isotope ratios in its teeth indicating aquatic tendencies. Indohyus seems to have been walking along the bottoms of rivers and other waterways with its dense limbs weighing it down to feed on vegetation and small invertebrates underwater. Around the same time time that Indo-Hyas and its relatives were striding along the riverbeds of prehistoric India, another lineage that had split off from a common ancestor with Indo-Hyas a few million years prior were also wading through the waterways of South Asia. These were the Pachycetids, the first true cetaceans. Although they were still mostly terrestrial animals with 4 limbs for supporting their weight on land, the wolf-sized Pachycetids again had very dense bones that would have helped them to stay submerged, and tooth isotope ratios consistent with lots of time spent in river systems. They also had features of the inner ear bones similar to modern whales. These animals likely hunted prey in rivers by bottom walking, as well as doing a bit of paddling and undulatory swimming. Also living around this time in the Indo-Pakistan region were the Ambulocetids, their name meaning the walking whales. This group includes the well-known Ambulocetus, for which some very complete fossil remains have been discovered. You can think of this ancient whale as essentially a mammalian crocodile, and indeed paleontologists have suggested that it lived in a similar way, lying in wait in rivers or lakes for unsuspecting land animals to wander too close to the edge before jumping out and clamping its jaws around them. However, other researchers have questioned the terrestrial abilities of Ambulocetus, finding that it might not have been able to support itself on land. The Remingtonocetids were another of the oldest cetaceans that still had ties to land. They also inhabited the Indo-Pakistan area, between about 48 and 40 million years ago, though they had begun to spread further afield, with fossils of these beasts turning up in Egypt. They looked even more like mammal versions of crocodiles than Ambulocetus, with very long snouts and elongated bodies that would have been held close to the ground by their short limbs. Remingtonocetids could likely still walk on land, but they had many clear adaptations for swimming and probably inhabited nearshore marine settings, where they hunted underwater for their food. So the whales had started venturing out from freshwater environments and into the sea. This brings us to the Protocetids, which appeared at some point in the mid-Eocene epoch about 47.5 million years ago. This was a much more diverse family than the ones we've looked at so far, being split into 3 subfamilies and including at least 25 different species. This group represents the start of the global distribution of whales. They again originated in the Indo-Pakistan region near the shrinking Tethys Sea, but fossils of the Protocetid species that lived later on in the Eocene have been found across North Africa, Europe, and the Americas, indicating that they very quickly diversified and expanded their ranges. Protocetids were still apparently nearshore semi-aquatic animals though, with most species still able to support their bodies on land. Towards the end of the Middle Eocene, about 43 million years ago, the Basilosaurids emerged in our planet's waters. These cetaceans were fully adapted to life in the water, and they became quickly widespread and diverse, being known from every continent. They include the famous and fearsome predatory species Basilosaurus with its very long and almost serpentine body, plus the recently named Perucetus colossus, which for a time was a contender for the heaviest animal that has ever lived, although other estimates have since downsized it a bit. It was then from somewhere amongst the different species traditionally considered as Basilosaurids that the ancestors of the modern whales split off. That might sound somewhat vague, and that's because it is, with a few very recent studies finding different positions for where exactly they branched. Nevertheless, at some point in the late Eocene, they made their entrance. The extinct cetacean groups we've looked at up until now are collectively known as Archaeocetes, the ancient cetaceans. But now the Neocetes were here, the new cetaceans, which includes the living Mysticetes, the baleen whales, and the Odontocetes, the toothed whales. The oldest Mysticete that we know of is Mystacodon from Peru, at 36.4 million years old, living near the end of the Eocene epoch. The early baleen whales were still toothed at this point, and then later species such as the 33 million year old Maya balena were toothless. Baleen for filter feeding then seems to have evolved after this toothless stage. The Odontocetes are thought to have diverged from the Mysticetes about 38 million years ago. All living Odontocetes echolocate, and this ability seems to have evolved pretty early on in the lineage, within 5 million years of their origin. Interestingly, it also seems that echolocation actually convergently evolved twice in Odontocetes, once in an extinct group called the Xenorophids, and then again in the ancestors of all living toothed whales. Both the Odontocetes and Mysticetes continued to undergo various pulses of evolutionary radiation throughout the Oligocene epoch that follows the Eocene, and then into the Neogene Period as well, eventually leading to the wonderful diversity of whales we see in our waters today. The evolution of whales is truly one of the most fascinating aspects of the history of life on Earth. These fossil discoveries of transitional cetacean species beautifully illustrate the immense transformative power of natural selection across large timescales and the remarkable adaptability of mammals. So that's a very brief look at whale evolution. I hope you find it as fascinating as I do. Back to you, Lindsay.
And that is why Ben is the best. Also send him a congratulations in the comments for finishing up his masters. That is bad bitch business. And that takes us into the Oligocene epoch, the last of the three that make up the Paleogene period. Continuing on with the trend from before, by the time the Oligocene came around, the world was pretty cold. Antarctica was a sheet of ice. It hadn't been before. That was new. So now let's look at some of the animals that were new as well. Starting off with the terror birds. Psilopterus was one of the smallest terror birds that we know of. Got to about 2.5 feet tall. They were more sleek, more slender than other terror birds, and maybe could have still been able to fly. Despite their tiny build, they would have been a formidable predator to the small animals of a rat size. And another one, Andrewsornis, much bigger at about 5.5 feet tall. They used power, as well as speed, to annihilate their prey. And by the way, both of them are from Argentina. Next is not a terror bird, but a very large seabird, Pelagornis. Not just a very large seabird, but the largest wingspan of any flying bird ever that we know of. At up to 21 feet long. Dude, that is twice the length of my room. I literally can't even comprehend that. They were not only large, but also heinous. Their beaks were horrific, lines with teeth-like projections on them. This is a bird out of a nightmare, if you ask me. This is the kind of bird that would have confirmed my hatred for birds before I started appreciating them like an adult. And now, let's move on to the mammals. I know, the mammals already. From my perspective, while researching, and hopefully the fossil records perspective as well, the Oligocene was kind of sandwiched between two really intense epochs with a lot of shit going on. The Eocene, check, and the Miocene, which is coming in the next episode. So the Oligocene was kind of like shit was chugging along from the next epoch with a few appearances of new groups. One of those was Ecaltidea. A carnivorous rat kangaroo. Quite a fucking name, I know. Rat kangaroos are marsupials, so from Australia. Not to be confused with the kangaroo rat from North America. This was a killer rat kangaroo with buzzsaw-shaped molars, perfect for ripping flesh. And next, big update. We finally have our first true cat. Allow me to introduce you to Proailerus, the ancestor to Koya, Odie, your cats at home, and all of the lovely cats around the world. Proailerus was somewhere between the size of your typical house cat and an ocelot. They had features more like a mongoose. Again, kind of the primitive form. They had slightly retractable claws. Check. But slightly longer muzzles than cats today. So probably looked like a fusa in real life. Round of applause for the cats. This next one is one that has no connection to any species alive today. It was an evolutionary dead end, and I am upset about it. It just looked like a baby hippo permanently. But it wasn't related to hippos at all. It belonged to a group called Desmostylia, which was an order of aquatic mammals that existed from the Oligocene to the Miocene. Like, boom. Come and gone like a fucking torpedo. Acheroa was the smallest Desmostylian that we know of, and also the cutest. They're about 5.5 feet long and had very small tusks. Fossil evidence suggests they were pretty much restricted to the water, but maybe moved around on land to rest or mate. Other than that, not interested. They had very strange teeth, unlike those of any animals alive today. So what they ate? Who fucking knows? Probably seagrass or kelp, which seems very on brand for them. I hope you like them as much as I do, and I hope I made your day by showing them to you. Now let's move on to the ungulates, which, as you would expect, have some of the stranger specimens of the Oligocene. Starting off with Pyrotherium. Looks like an elephant ancestor, but was not. Their name means fire beasts, because their fossils were found in volcanic ash deposits. Totally and completely badass. Pyrotherium, like I said, was an ungulate, but not within the bounds of even or odd toes. Their place in the ungulate family tree is very much up for debate. Their characteristics are so unusual they were thought to be marsupials at one point. Not anymore. But for now, they are the mysterious fire beasts. I have a quick little Calicothere update for you before we move on to the more outlandish. Borisiakia, a large Calicothere with a sloping back and longer front legs. They were 13 feet long, and I like them a lot. That's it. I just like them. And now, I've got 2 more left for you. You've been a great crowd. I love this city. So I'm gonna end the show with some certified bangers. Picture a pig. Now picture a hell pig. What could that possibly look like? Perhaps like this. Allow me to introduce you to the Entelodons, a group of ungulates that are more commonly known as hell pigs. They actually first appeared in the Eocene, but reached their most heinous forms in the Oligocene, which is why I saved them for some of the last. Obviously, the bony projections on their skulls are just heinous, which has led to shit like this. Grotesque. Also this. What the fuck is this? Definitely the victims of shrink wrapping and early reconstructions, reminiscent of Esteminosuchus. So here's what the fuck they got going on. They were either hunters or scavengers. Maybe both. Either way, they were definitely tearing shit up. One particular genus stands out. Daedon, one of the largest entelodonts that we know of. They were about 6 feet tall at the shoulder, dude. A 6 foot tall pig. Not true pig, but whatever. A big fucking pig. But what's more troubling is a model that was made of them in 1910. Just look at it for a second. Not too long, because there's probably a demonic presence in it. It's called the Hyas, after Dino Hyas, which is the scientific name they used to have. This was made by a famous American sculptor named Theodore Mills. Other things he's worked on? Making the cast of Abraham Lincoln's face only 60 days before Lincoln was assassinated. Coincidence? I don't think so. There's something terrible going on here. Anyway, that's the Hell Pigs. We're gonna end on a much lighter note, with what just so happens to be one of my favorite extinct animals of all time. I feel like I can't say it's my absolute favorite, because now I know of so many. But usually when people ask me what my favorite extinct animal is, I say this one, Paraceratherium, possibly the largest land mammal to ever exist, that we know of. They kind of look like a mix between a giraffe and an elephant, but were actually a type of rhino. It's like a 3-for-1 special. They were about 24 feet long and taller than a 2-story building. When I first learned about them, I lived on a 3rd-floor apartment, and I remember imagining looking out into the courtyard and seeing them walk through with the tops of their heads almost reaching my level, and I thought that was just the most insane thing to think about. Obviously, we've talked about sauropods that could get much bigger than this, other animals that got taller, but this one just hits a lot closer to home for me. I think it's because they're easier to imagine, because they're mammals, and they just look more like what I know today. I mean, dude, you could just walk right under them. Just imagine that. I think that's so cool. And they'll definitely get their own dedicated video eventually, but for now I'll just stick to the quick facts. Unfortunately, there's not a lot known about Paraceratherium. They've gone by many names in the past, depending on what country they were found in, which was extremely confusing and probably led to a lot of delay in understanding them more. You might have heard of them as Intricotherium, which was the most common other name. There was also Aceratherium, Belucotherium, the Zongariatherium. They are confusion. They are mystery. There's a lot more we need to learn about them. They possibly had a prehensile lip. Their skull morphology supports the possibility of a short proboscis, like one of early elephants, or similar to a tapir. I think that's so cool. They represent that we know of to its core because we really don't know shit about them, and I love that. I say we make a petition to get more research going on. For now, we'll do it in the form of giving this video a like, and I will email every paleontologist in the country with demands. As Earth was exiting the Paleogene, the world was getting a bit warmer. There wasn't any mass extinction event. This was just one of those periods that moved on to the next, and paved the way for a new set of strange specimens, as well as the development of many of the beloved groups that had their start in this period. Hello. I decided to get festive today for the festive holiday season. Obviously, I had to stick with the black, and I hope you like it. I spent about 5 minutes before filming trying to figure out which side to put the thing on. It felt like the graduation cap thing, you know, where it has to be on one side and then you flip it to the other, but I think I'm gonna keep it here. Let's get the global conditions out of the way. The word of this period is connection. For the last 2 periods, I've talked about shit spreading further and further apart from each other on a continental level. And while yes, shit was still moving around, it did so in ways that created new opportunities to spread out, explore new places, new heights, etc. For example, India had been plowing into Asia for a little bit. It kept doing that. Voila. Say hello to the Himalayan mountains. Also, generally, the period got cooler and drier over time. Generally, ice sheets got thicker. Sea levels got lower. Voila. Say hello to land bridges, new continental connections. I'll tell you about some specific ones in a bit. The cooler and drier trend obviously had an impact on plants. Remember, in the last period, there were forests that stretched almost pole to pole. These started to get replaced to shit by grasslands. That is a drastic change that you will see had a drastic impact on the terrestrial inhabitants. Also, a new sheriff was in town in the oceans. Kelp. I know. Insane to think about the ocean without kelp. They had their roots in the Paleogene and really started sprouting in the Neogene. Also, I want to make a distinction here that might feel like common sense to you, but did not for me. Sometimes you just know about things passively, but can't say anything about it for certain. For example, if you were to ask me 2 weeks ago if kelp is just seaweed, I would hesitantly say, I think so. Turns out that is not true. So I'm going to tell you what I learned. Seaweed is a lot of different things. It's more of an umbrella term to describe algae in the water that you can see with your eyes. Macroscopic rather than microscopic. It also doesn't refer to a single taxonomic group, kind of in the same way that worms can mean a lot of different kinds of animals and aren't necessarily related to each other. All worms don't share the same worm common ancestor. When you see it, you're like, yeah, that's a worm if I've ever seen one. There's something like 7 different phyla of worms. It's just an ideal body form. Seaweed is the same way. You see seaweed and you're like, yeah, that's seaweed if I ever seen it. Seaweed can be found in many different plant groups, but all seaweed doesn't share a seaweed common ancestor. I hope that makes sense. So, kelp is just a type of seaweed, a very specific group of brown algae that has since evolved to form vast kelp forests that lots of sea creatures live in. Kelp forests are sick and really started to take over in the Neogene. So, that's that. All right, now we're going to move on to the stars of the show. The animals. We're doing the same setup as last time, going epic by epic, doing smaller units of time. And this time we have 2. The Miocene, which lasted from 23 to 5.3 million years ago, and the Pliocene, which lasted from 5.3 to 2.6 million years ago. The Miocene seems like the favorite sibling. I know. Took up many more million years than the Pliocene. I think if the Miocene and the Pliocene were sports teams, the Miocene would be known for more intense fans. I don't know sports teams well enough to know which ones have the more intense fans, but you know what the fuck I'm talking about. But I think it's more important to remember that these boundaries we set between sections of time are all made up by us to categorize things in a way that makes sense to our brains. Mass extinctions make it really easy to make boundaries, but those boundaries do not actually exist. Species and lineages continue through them with ease. Many animals from the Oligocene continued on into the Miocene with little to no changes. Might have originated in the Oligocene, but are more well known from the Miocene, just as an example. Also, they had no concept of any of these boundaries or the species that came before them millions of years before. Titanoboa had no idea it existed so soon after a mass extinction caused by an asteroid. So, just some food for thought, I guess. That was kind of a little tangent. Anyway, the only distinction between the two epochs that should matter to you is that the Miocene was warmer and the Pliocene was cooler, generally and relatively. So now, let's get into the Miocene. We're gonna start off in the oceans, see what the fuck is up with the fish. And just FYI, on our list today is one fish and a few other, technically, mega-evolved fish. Because I guess if you go back far enough, marine mammals came from fish. So they are technically fish. I talked about this with Hank on his channel recently, which has me questioning my labeling.
The fact is, whales are fish.
Yes, we are fish.
But they're fish-shaped.
A lot of things are fish-shaped. Manatees are fish-shaped.
Also fish.
But, depending on your perspective, this section is one fish and a few marine mammals, or a wide variety of very specialized fish. So, in the last episode, we talked about a variety of mammalian groups that went back to the water. Whales, obviously. The Sirenians, the extinct Desmostylians, etc. There's one group I didn't tell you about because there was too much shit going on. The seals and the sea lions, also known as the Pinnipeds. I want you to guess what group they fall into, the bigger groups that we've been talking about. The ungulates? Good guess, but no. Wouldn't be surprising considering how many ungulates went back to the water. I'll give you a hint. Seals and sea lions have a very cute nickname, and also, sea lions have it in their name. Water dogs, sea lions. Yes, these are carnivorans. Actual water dogs. On the dog side of the split, they are caniforms. I'm sure you can see the resemblance. The pinnipeds also include walruses, by the way, and all the other seals. Their fossil record goes back about 30 million years. But by the time the Miocene came around, they were in full swing. And I have one particular species to introduce you to, Pontolis, a massive walrus, even bigger than walruses today. More like the size of an elephant seal. Do you know how fucking big elephant seals are, dude? I feel like they deserve their own video. Nobody talks about them. Nobody talks about how big they are. Have you heard about Neil the seal?
Come on, Neil, leave the girls alone. Neil, leave him alone. Yeah.
I could do a whole video on Neil the seal. He's not even full grown and he's that big. And Pontolis got to about the same size as adult Neil the seal. Rather than the classic walrus tusks, Pontolis had 4 big fangs for canines. So, just another heinous marine predator to add to the list for the Miocene. Because yes, like I've teased before, this is also the time of the Megalodon, the most definitely extinct shark that holds the title of the largest predatory fish to ever exist, that we know of. And the strongest bite force of any animal ever in the history of time that we know of. 40,000 pounds per square inch. That shit would fucking vaporize your bones, dude. They were highly active predators with an appetite like nobody's business and inhabited shallow coastal waters all around the world. They got to somewhere between 30 to 65 feet long and are most definitely extinct, like I said in the Junk Spearseas video, and hopefully convinced you of, if that was needed. The thought of them perusing the ocean is a heinous one. It's hard to imagine how anybody got anything done in the Miocene waters, but somehow, despite this, another apex predator emerged, the Leviathan whale, the only known competitor and potential predator of the Megalodon. Despite being lesser known, Leviathan inhabited the same waters at the same time as the Meg, competing for the same food sources and likely ate each other at least a little bit. Leviathan was first discovered in Peru back in 2008, so pretty recently. Their skull alone was 10 feet long. 10 feet long, dude. That is the length of my room, of just skull only. Ugh. God, that's horrible. They're a type of sperm whale that, based on the skull, was about the same size as a modern sperm whale. There are animals on this planet whose skulls wouldn't even fit in my room. That makes me sick. But the real nightmare was their mouth, equipped with teeth that each got to a foot long, the largest biting teeth of any animal to ever exist, that we know of, which made them quite the heinous prehistoric beast. I don't know if you remember or if you were around for it, but back in 2023, I did a whole video comparing the two to decide who would win, if you want to check it out. I don't think it's outdated yet. So, enjoy. For now, we're going to move out of the Miocene oceans and onto land. with the reptiles. Starting off with a heavy hitter. Bam! Stupendemys geographicus, a turtle the size of a car. If you were alive during the Miocene, this could have been your ride to the grocery store. About the size of a Mini Cooper and a lovely vehicle for South American wetland systems. With a shell that got to almost 10 feet long, this was the largest freshwater turtle to ever exist. That we know of. They had massive skulls, with jaws that indicate they fed on hard-shelled specimens such as mollusks, perhaps a crab on occasion. Based on the growth patterns of long-living turtles alive today, they could possibly live to over 110 years old to get to their maximum size. Very old, very wise. They were like the grandmothers of the Miocene. But their size and age didn't keep them from being on the menu, because there was also shit like this. Bam! Persaurus, a crocodilian that got to 42 feet long and over 16,000 pounds, making them one of, if not the, largest crocodilians to ever exist. That we know of. Fuck the Cretaceous. The Miocene was serious business. They had massive jaws, with teeth that were perfectly shaped for piercing and smashing large prey, like Stupendemys geographicus. Dude, there have been crocodilian teeth found embedded in the fossils of their shells. A formidable predator that probably would have swallowed you whole. Another crocodilian I have to show you is Quincana. Not as big, about 10 feet long, respectable, but terrestrial. So, still heinous if you ask me. They were alive in, you guessed it, Australia. The only place terrestrial crocodiles would be welcomed with a gift basket. And the next one is a little bit cuter. Mecosuchus. About 6 feet long, max, and had snouts that made them look like reptilian dogs. Alright, moving on to the birds, which you probably remember from last time we're fucking on one after the extinction of their non-avian brethren. We had shit like Pelagornis, with the largest wingspan of any flying bird that we know of. They continued on into the Miocene too, just FYI. But there was another big bird that was a contender for the title, Argentavis, found in, you guessed it, Argentina. Pelagornis and Argentavis have roughly the same wingspan, somewhere between 20 to 24 feet. I didn't really see a point in telling you that until now. Just for the record, I'm biased towards Argentavis because I knew about them way before I knew about Pelagornis. So, I think of them as the biggest. Is that scientific? Not even a little bit. What can I say? I am just a girl. You probably also remember I mentioned terror birds. How could you possibly forget? What's going on with them now? Well, the Miocene is when shit started to get real. First off, fun fact, the first ever terror bird found was alive in the Miocene, Rachis longissimus. Not the first terror bird, but the first terror bird ever discovered by humans. They were the classic terror bird, 7 to 8 feet tall, hooked beak, and claws to kill. And it turned out as time went on in the scientific community that this particular species was not alone, and had relatives even more heinous than the OG, like Kellenkin, who got to 10 feet tall, and Denisovans, another one about the same size. These 3 species alone prove that the essence of the Cretaceous dinosaurs didn't die with them on that one spring day 66 million years ago. No, it lived on in terror birds, and also today with godforsaken shit like this. I have another heinous bird to show you from the Miocene that might be a terror bird, but the general consensus is kind of leaning towards a different kind of heinous bird. It's called Brontornis. It's like the fucking powerlifting version of terror birds. They were somewhere around 800 pounds. 800 pounds of bird, dude. Luckily, there's a chance this one was an herbivore. There's a chance. There's really not enough fossil evidence to say what kind of diet they had, so for now, we must hope it was an herbivore. Another group of heinous birds that were not terror birds were the thunderbirds. Oh, I know, sounds like the name of a diner at Disneyland. But no, these were horrific. They first appeared in the Eocene, but started getting fucking nuts during the Miocene, which is why I waited until now to tell you about them. So, check this out. Dromornis. I'm gonna be honest, this bird makes me want to be a certified bird hater again. I really do not like what's going on here. You're probably thinking, Lindsay, this looks pretty much exactly like all the other birds you've shown so far, but even the smallest changes can be devastating. I don't like the thought of this mouth moving. And then that got me thinking, you know what? I don't really like the thought of any bird's mouth moving. I don't really like the way it looks. But you know what I do like is this life-size sculpture of it that is for sale in Australia. And also, speaking of Australia, guess where Brontornis is from? Wait, not Brontornis, Dromornis. Why the fuck did I write Brontornis? Isn't it Dromornis? Okay, yeah, it is Dromornis. I'm just a fucking idiot. Guess where Dromornis is from? Yes, Australia. And they probably ate plants. That's all I want to say about thunderbirds. Because it's time we move on to the mammals. The Miocene pops the fuck off with it. I also want to say this is peak mammalian weird shit, but I think it's just going to be weird consistently for the rest of the series. I don't know. I guess you'll be the judge of that. We're going to start off with the least mammalian mammal, a giant platypus called Obdurodon. That's a sick name. At about 3 feet long, they were twice the size of platypuses of today. Today's platypus has a classic bill. No teeth, as you would expect from a bill. This was not the case for Obdurodon. They had extremely well-developed teeth, perfect for crushing crayfish and other crustaceans. Perhaps the occasional frog or fish when the moment was right. Now we're on to the real mammals. Not real mammals. That was mean. The true mammals. I guess that's not very much better. But now we're on to the Eutherians, the true mammals. One group that especially saw an explosion in the Miocene were the Proboscideans, the relatives to elephants. They popped off, and I'm so excited to show you what the fuck they had going on. So first off, I want to say, it seems as though they diversified to shit because of the land bridges popping up all over the place. They were able to migrate out of Africa and expand into new lands, adapt to new environments. And second, they got bigger. This was the time of the massive elephants, and so this led to, boom, Dinotherium, an elephant relative with downward curving tusks. They were massive. The animals themselves could get to about 13 feet tall at the shoulder and up to 30,000 pounds. And the tusks were massive too, actually, like 4 feet long each. So skulls of this prehistoric crimson chin led to some really fucked up ideas of what they had going on. In the 1700s, scientists thought they were aquatic. Yeah, aquatic elephants, because the tusks seemed too heavy to possibly carry onto land. So they thought, must be in the water, using them to scrape the bottom of the sea floor or lake floor for plant material to eat. And in the 1800s, scientists only built on top of this, suggesting maybe they slammed their tusks into the bank at night, hooking themselves in so they could keep their head above water and also not float away. As you would guess, this turned out to be not the case. Their skulls were relatively light. So unfortunately, as of now, there were no aquatic elephants we know of. Dinotherium was around for a really long time, like 20 to 2 million years ago, making it into the next period and into a new continent. During their time, they migrated out of Africa and into Eurasia, ending up on the same continent as one of their relatives, the Gomphotheres, arguably the most grotesque family of the elephant lineage, with 2 pairs of tusks, an upper pair that pointed kind of down and out, and a lower pair that was more like a shovel. They looked like a walking Swiss Army knife, especially ones like Rhynchotherium, found in the southwest United States. So yeah, that is a cool thing about Gomphotheres. They migrated out of Africa into Eurasia, and then across the land bridge into North America, then also into South America. So they diversified and got weird as fuck, and resulted in groups like Platypelodon, who I've talked about at length before. They're also known as the shovel-tusked elephant. Their mouth and tusks were shaped like a shovel, which led scientists to assume they used it like a shovel. Looks like a shovel, must be used like a shovel. That turned out to be not the case. Micro-wear patterns on the teeth tell a different tale. Instead, it seems like they would have used their shovel mouth in many ways, like plucking up vegetation with their trunk and rubbing it against their shovel teeth to saw through it, or using their lower teeth to scrape bark from trees, using their trunk to grasp branches as a stabilizer while they swung their heads back and forth, sawing at it. If you want to hear more about them, you can check out the Platypelodon video. But when you describe an elephant, you probably say something like large, round, gray, naked. Well, actually, you probably say tusk, trunk, big ears. That doesn't matter right now. I'm transitioning us into the next group on the list. So, what's another group that can also be described as large, round, gray, and naked? Yes, just kidding. Hippos. That's right, bitches. We got hippos in the Miocene. We're on to the Artiodactyls, the even-toed ungulates. You probably won't be surprised to find out that hippos are most closely related to whales. The ungulates got modded the fuck out. Hippos are obviously outrageous in modern day. They're considered the most deadly land mammal, apparently killing about 500 people per year. I'm not sure how accurate that number is. I didn't count them myself. I saw it on some reputable websites. So, they can take down a fishing boat. They can outrun you easily. When you're in an area with hippos at night, you have to make noise constantly so they know you're there. Because if they don't know, and you spook them, you're toast.
You picked the wrong house, fool!
It's horrifying. Walking from point A to point B with a flashlight to get dinner in hippo territory is probably the most unrelaxed I've ever been in my entire life. And I'm sure it won't surprise you to find out that some of the prehistoric forms are just as heinous, if not more. So, allow me to introduce you to Hexaprotodon, a thick beast with a mouth like nobody's business. They were more prevalent as time went on, but evolved in the Miocene nonetheless. They were smaller than modern hippos, but had proportionally larger teeth. Otherwise, kind of had the same shit going on. Semi-aquatic, ate plants, etc. All right, let's check in with the camel family. I actually want to make a distinction that I didn't mention last time. Got a little bit ahead of myself. I mentioned Pobertherium, an early relative to the camel family, but they were not true camels. That did not happen yet, because the camel family, Camelidae, includes much more than just camels. Uh-oh. I don't know how to pronounce those.
Vicuña.
Guanaco. Could have fucking figured that out myself, actually. Just being a traitor to my kind. It also includes llamas, alpacas, vicuñas, and guanacos. Those 4 belong to their own subgroup in the family called Lamini, and the camels are in Camelini. That's the split. It's simple. Camelini, camels. Lamini, everything else. By the way, I don't think I'm pronouncing these right. It's probably Lamini and Camelini, but I couldn't find a pronunciation online, so I'm doing what I want. And I like this because it makes them sound like different martinis. I feel like Camelini would have a flavor profile like a banana pina colada, and a Lamini would be more like a strawberry daiquiri. They both sound delicious. Anyway, the split between the martinis happened about right smack in the middle of the Miocene. So on the camel side, in Camelini, we had Procamelus, thought to be an early representative in the group. It was about 5.5 feet tall, kind of looked like a modern representative of Lamini. But this was the early days. Shit was not established in forms yet. An early representative of Lamini, though, was Hemiocenian. Kind of looks the same. We'll check back in with the martinis in later time. One last artiodactyl I want to show you is Prolibetherium, otherwise known as one handsome son of a bitch. This is the face of adapting to bay, i.e. reproductive selection. Traits that become more pronounced only to attract the ladies. Usually the ladies. They just sit back and choose. And good for them. Reproductive selection is weird because a lot of the time the traits evolve in the opposite way you'd expect for survivability. You want to stand out, make an impression on the women. But because of that, you're also making an impression on predators. Think about peacocks, the icons of reproductive selection. Bright colors. Huge, dazzling feathers that look delicious to a female, but also to a large feline. So reproductive selection is a few things going on at once. You're telling a potential mate that you're genetically superior because 1, you look like that. And 2, you look like that and you're still alive. And also, I said this in the freak edition of What the Fuck Is This? It means evolution is not about survival of the fittest. It's survival of whoever gets to bang the most. I didn't say it like that in the video. I said it worse. You got the gist then, and you get the gist now. An animal's goal in life, or the goal of the genes, is to be passed on through reproduction at the highest rate possible. That could be either surviving longer than the others, having more offspring over time, or it could be being a certified freak and banging a lot. Live fast, die young scenario. The genes don't care how they're passed on to the next generation. They're just hoping for the largest amount possible. So, adaptations will evolve for both reasons, even when they sometimes go against each other. And I'm gonna guess that Prolibetherium was going too far in the reproductive selection direction. How the fuck do you see with this thing? Also, not very streamlined if you ask me. Alright, moving on to the odd-toed ungulates, the Perissodactyls. I think the only updates I have are with the Chalicotheres, and they're not really big ones. Some notable Miocene species were Meropus, a smaller horse-like builds that I kind of already showed you. And this is also the time of Chalicotherium, the species that first described Chalicotheres as a whole. They are the classic, grotesque Chalicothere. I showed you pictures of them last time, so just know. The Miocene was the true time of the Chalicotheres. They were full-on knuckle-walking, had big claws like sloths. They were found all over Eurasia and North America. Bada bing, bada boom. That's all for now. Now let's talk about what would have eaten them. Yes, carnivora, the carnivorous carnivorans. Since we've already talked about the water dogs, let's finish up the rest of the caniform group. Allow me to introduce you to Epicyon, also known as the bone-crushing dogs. They were one of the largest canids to ever exist, that we know of. It was first described in 1858, by the way. One of the first vertebrates described from the North American Miocene. One of those was Epicyon haydeni, about the size of a grizzly bear. A dog the size of a grizzly bear. This is what Game of Thrones must have been inspired by, because, by the way, the direwolves in the show were way oversized. They had extreme adaptations for a bone-crushing diet, massive carnassial teeth, and molars similar to a hyena. There are also some cat updates. Last time we left off with some of the first cats, Proailurus. In the Miocene, there was another split that led to the lineage that lives on today, and the lineage that includes the saber-toothed cats, also known as the Machaerodonts. The most famous Machaerodont from this time was Machaerodus. On average, they are about the size of a tiger with elongated canines. But some species in this genus are up there as some of the largest cats to ever exist that we know of, reaching up to 900 pounds, dude. I've worked with Siberian tigers, which were 600 pounds. And I am telling you, 600 pounds is enough cat. They looked like fucking animatronics, they were so big. 900? No thank you. Machaerodus was definitely an apex predator in their ecosystem, with ambush-style attacks. The largest could take down bison-sized prey, and of course, also you, if you were a Miocene creature. We've talked about cats. We've talked about dogs. Last time we talked about bear dogs. Well, I'm pleased to announce that now we have dog bears. The bear dogs were neither dog nor bear, but the dog bears were actually bears in the group Ursidae, the bear family, by the way. Remember, dogs and bears are both on the caniform side of the split, the dog side. So it's not surprising that there's a dog-like bear and something in between, in the deep past. Their scientific name was Hemicyon. They were found all over Eurasia and North America. They had teeth suitable for slicing flesh in their hyper-carnivorous diet. They're about 5 feet long, so about the size of a modern-day puma. So, definitely capable of taking you down as well. I have a little bonus section that I haven't done yet. The rodents. I don't really talk about it because rats are rats. But there's a couple in the Miocene I gotta talk about. They are absolutely grotesque. The first one, Phoberemes, a 500-pound rodent. Insane. Also, I think this is possibly my favorite reconstruction of them ever. This is the best. Here's them drinking water. 10-foot-long rats by the swamp. And the next one, Hostopho artigacea. Quite a name, and fitting for the biggest rodent to ever exist that we know of. Over 1,000 pounds of rodent dude. Too much rodent if you ask me. That's bigger than Macaridus. That's enough. While massive rodents and heinous carnivores are absolutely cool to talk about, I would argue that the most interesting aspect of the Neogene is the evolution of our own lineage. It's especially cool to talk about within the context of the rest of this period, knowing what kind of predators and prey our ancestors were dealing with. Hominin evolution and the story of our lineage is very humbling in the best way possible. Realize how small we are in the grand scheme of things, but also because it's complicated as fuck. And luckily, my friend Erica was down to untangle it for this video. You're probably familiar with her as Gutsick Gibbon, and if you're not, holy shit, you are in for a new channel to binge. She makes a ton of biology, prehistory, zoology content, and also debunks people to shit, all with a very unique perspective provided by her Master's of Research degree in primate biology, behavior, and conservation. And also, she's a current PhD student in biological anthropology. She is a bad bitch, and hands down, the perfect person to turn to for this section of the video. So I'm gonna hand it over to her now. Erica, take it away.
Hello, Lindsay's audience. My name is Erica. I'm Gutsick Gibbon, and I'm honored to be here with you gentle and, of course, very modern apes. You guys probably already know this, but humans are very weird animals. We are a part of a superfamily called Hominoidea, the apes, which is an already odd group of critters characterized by tailless mobile bodies, big brains, slow development, and a propensity to manipulate the environment in order to accomplish tasks. But humans are exceptional even among the apes because we take many of those characteristics and evidently just go sicko mode with them, dialing them up to 11 and resulting in a globally dominant species with a god complex. How does something like this happen? The stage for the world's most ambitious ape was set in the Neogene. The world was warm and getting warmer, allowing dense forests to slowly but surely stretch their way north. Apes first evolved in eastern Africa, descending from an unknown catarrhine monkey, but it's probably Egyptopithecus, at the dawn of the Miocene epoch. Now I could sit here, as I so desperately want to, and go through every single name of every single cool and charismatic Miocene ape, but Lindsay cleverly gave me a time limit.
It's so sick and twisted.
Which I'm already pushing, and we have a long way to go. The first apes can be identified by countless small characteristics that I would love to bore you with, but the knockout feature was found in a partial skeleton of a Kembo-Nyanze in 1993, a sacrum whose morphology precludes a tail. A Kembo also had a slightly larger brain for its body size than the monkeys that came before it. These features helped apes get a foothold in faunal communities, allowing them to diversify into countless niches. Some places, like where I work in Western Kenya, have like 4 to 5 species of ape living in the same ecosystem, which is really weird. Can you think of any place today that has 4 to 5 species of apes living at the same place at the same time, niche partitioning? No, because that's like the amount of apes that we have total. As the Miocene reached a fever pitch, so did the climate. The Miocene climatic optimum allowed forests to expand into the northern regions of Europe and Asia, and thanks to a new land bridge, the apes expanded with them. This is the true planet of the apes that allowed these hominoids to begin to experiment with what they ate and how they moved. Unlike most monkeys, apes begin to move below the branches using long arms and mobile shoulders. This mode of locomotion required something new, an upright or orthograde posture. The Miocene climate was changing though, growing colder and freezing out those northern forests and woodlands. This culminated in the Valesian Crisis, a dramatic faunal turnover event that sent those northern forest dwellers of Europe and Asia careening into extinction, including the many Miocene apes. The apes that survived did so in the African and Southeast Asian forests that remained, but change was coming there too because a new biome was beginning to take hold, the grasslands. So the forest cover of Eastern Africa was shrinking, but the climate was still warm enough and there were still enough trees to prevent an ape wipeout. But let's ask a quick question. What do you get when you have an upright ape in the trees and you take away the trees? Well, you get bipedalism. There were likely many pressures that led to the evolution of bipedalism in a subset of apes called hominins, but it seems very reasonable to propose that the ability to move from tree cluster to tree cluster in a growing grassland environment was one of the big ones. In ape evolution, and more specifically human evolution, we see a pretty specific prediction that the first members of our lineage after the split between humans and chimpanzees should look pretty primitive with just a few hints of what would come to be modern morphology. That is precisely what we see in the first proposed, and admittedly extremely controversially so, hominins. Sahelanthropus chidensis is 7 million years old, and it is the oldest proposed hominin, and this thing is really primitive. Sahelanthropus chidensis looks like a regular old Miocene ape, except for a few little tiddly-wink characteristics that sort of suggest a future hominin descendant. Things like its reduced canine teeth and its anterior or forwardly placed foramen magnum. This is the hole at the base of the skull that allows for an upright posture and eventually, especially in us, bipedalism. But this thing is, like I said, super controversial. It's the Spinosaurus of early hominins, so we'll see, put a pin in it. But the first bona fide hominins, such as Ardipithecus ramidus, unsurprisingly have stunningly transitional morphologies that expound on the trend that is hinted at in earlier hominins like Sahelanthropus or Aurorantuganensis. They also lived in predominantly mixed woodland and grassland environments. Arboreal apes live in the trees. Terrestrial apes live in the grasslands. Transitional apes live in transitional environments. Evolution! But while these hominins, like Ardipithecus ramidus, were more human-like than anything that had come before, they were still missing one critical trend: an even bigger brain. Brains are ridiculously metabolically expensive. They require a lot of energy. So if you want to grow a bigger brain at the population level, if you want to evolve it, you need to broaden your dietary niche. You need to break your gray ceiling. In the Pliocene, there lived a hominin called Australopithecus. You may have heard of them.
Talented, brilliant, incredible, amazing, show-stopping, spectacular, never the same, totally unique.
These hominins were committed bipeds on the ground, continuing the trend of Ardipithecus before them, with brains not that much larger than a chimpanzee. Now, this may not seem like much, but it is with this meager mind that Australopithecus may have changed everything with regard to the evolution of hominins and set a course for Homo sapiens. All apes use tools, but few apes use stone tools, and fewer apes still manipulate those stone tools, altering them for a specific purpose. The oldest stone tools are known from a paleoanthropological site in Kenya called Lamekwi. The stone tools here are clearly altered, but they're primitive things, good for smashing and crude cutting and not much else. But Lamekwi is important because of its age and its inhabitants. It's 3.3 million years old and home to the first tool makers, Australopithecus afarensis, or Kenyanthropus. But even if it's Kenyanthropus, even older cut-marked bones are known from Dakika, which is where Australopithecus afarensis also lived. Australopithecus as individual apes, as individual hominins, were small and slow. They had no projectile weapons, no claws, no large canines. They probably scavenged bones, smashing them open to get at the bone marrow inside, or used their family groups to scare lone predators off their kills. This animal probably wasn't hunting, but it would beget the deadliest hunter of all time. That meat and marrow, the product of the first crude tools, allowed these hominins to grow larger brains, allowing them to innovate, allowing them to get more meat and marrow, which allowed hominins to grow bigger brains, which allowed them to innovate, allowing them to get more meat and marrow, which allowed them to grow even bigger brains, allowing more innovation, allowing more meat and marrow, and so on, and so on, and so on. The first basic tools dreamt up in the budding brain of an intrepid Australopith triggered a furious feedback loop that would eventually lead to the brain size explosion that would take place in genus Homo. And genus Homo would beget the curious, cruel, compassionate, ambitious ape that would come to dominate the Quaternary. The ballad of that hominin, of Homo sapiens, would obviously change the course of history and of life and biodiversity on the planet. But the stage was set in the Neogene, with an ape in the trees. Back to you, Lindsay. You're doing a great job.
And that's why Erica is the best. If you want more content on human evolution and prehistory in general, definitely check out her channel. And now, that transitions us into the Pliocene epoch. Like I said, this epoch lasted from 5.3 to 2.6 million years ago. This was all about shit going from warmer to colder. There was a little global warming spike towards the beginning of the epoch, then it started dipping again, still following the overall cooling trend, just so you know. We're gonna start off in the oceans again. First off, the Megalodon lost the throne and eventually went extinct at the end of this period. There's a few different ideas on why they went extinct. 1. They got outcompeted by smaller and more agile great white sharks that thus had a smaller appetite. Being big is cool. Having a big appetite is not cool. You need a lot of food. That's expensive. What if there's not enough around? You're screwed. There's evidence of a diversity crash in whales around the late Miocene, so the Meg was SOL. Some of them became competitors, other larger predatory whales, your sperm whale types, your killer whale types. So during this time, the Megalodon was on the road to Dunzo, and the whales were on the road to Giganto. This is the time they started to get genuinely, truly massive. Some were getting massive already, but overall, like I said, at the beginning of this period, there was a little temperature spike, which temporarily fucked up the glaciers and the ice sheets. So, ice sheets were pouring into the ocean, bringing with it massive amounts of minerals and nutrients on land, just flushing into the water. This theoretically fed a massive amount of plankton, which delivered whales an all-you-can-eat buffet all the time. There were no restrictions on how much food they could find, so they just got fucking huge. And in the ocean, it pays for mammals to get big. Their metabolic rates get relatively lower. The bigger they get, the lower the rate per unit is. Being endothermic in the ocean is just different. Also, it takes much less energy for a larger animal to move a certain distance than a smaller one. Also, bigger body means bigger mouth to eat plankton. It's a win-win. The particular whale I'm going to introduce you to, though, is one that does not fall into this growth category, but I promise you will still like them very much. Odobenocetops. Odobenocetops, a 12-foot-long whale with not only tusks, but extremely asymmetrical tusks. I know. This cetacean is nuts. Both males and females had this asymmetric look, very bohemian, very avant-garde. But the males were much more intense about it. Their longer tusk, the right one, could get to 4.5 feet long, a third of their body length. More than that, the other one just stuck out a little bit. In the females, the right one was only a little bit larger, but larger nonetheless. The male's right tusk was very slender, probably very delicate. They likely had a similar diet to walruses, but don't get it twisted. This is not a walrus. This is a whale. Just another classic case of convergent evolution with a twist. All right. Moving on to land, where shit is really starting to pop off. I mentioned a few land bridge migrations, and they got kicked into high gear during the Pliocene. Remember, groups have been going through massive radiation since the Cretaceous mass extinction, and had done so in isolated corners all around the world. The animals on each continent had been evolving in different directions for over 60 million years, getting used to their system. They had a system in place. And now, land bridges were connecting them to each other for the very first time since then, resulting in a biotic interchange, which you can kind of think of as a wall of death. Two separate sides, and then boom, they meet, and there's chaos all over the place. Okay, not that chaotic, but, you know, a lot of species started mixing into new ecosystems, so there's new predators, new prey, new competitors. So actually, you know what? Maybe actually that chaotic. One interchange I especially want to highlight happened between North and South America, became connected by the Isthmus of Panama, and resulted in what is called the Great American Biotic Interchange. Yes. Quite a name. The Gabby. The Isthmus of Panama had been forming for about 15 million years via tectonic movements and volcanic activity. And now, finally, about 3 million years ago, it surfaced to form a land bridge that changed American ecosystems permanently. In South America, the number of land mammal families nearly doubled, going from 18 to 36. This led to a period with the richest mammalian fauna in South America ever. And it wasn't just mammals that were impacted, also reptiles, birds, etc. It was everything. Probably one of the most famous migrants from this interchange was a terror bird that made its way to what is now Florida, a fitting destination for them if you ask me. This is Titanus, one of the last and largest of the terror birds that we know of. It's worth mentioning that there's some disagreement on the actual timeline of the interchange. Some scientists argue that rather than it happening 3 million years ago, it was 6 million years ago. Some argue even earlier than that. Titanus falls into this because their fossils in Texas date to about 5 million years ago, so maybe they arrived before the interchange in a much more difficult fashion. Maybe the interchange just started earlier than we understand it right now. Who knows? Not anyone really right now, so just keep that in mind. Titanus got to about 6 feet tall and 330 pounds. With that body form, that is dense and perfectly built for power and speed, chasing down prey in the grasslands. Well, they were likely an apex predator of their ecosystems. This was the end of the line for the terror bird lineage. Their South American relatives weren't doing so hot with the new sheriffs of the north, but I'll get to that in a bit. I want to quickly introduce you to a couple of reptiles before moving on to the mammalian stars of the ship. Megalochelys, a giant tortoise alive in Asia. Not much to say other than the fact that they were big, very big. I like their overall body form. I like how tall they are. Some of their shells are 5 feet long. That is sick. They're estimated to have had a lifespan somewhere between 300 to 400 years. Sick. I also have a snake to show you. The Bluff Downs giant python, the largest snake to ever exist in Australia. that we know of. It got to about 30 feet long, which is big, but I'm sure you were expecting a more heinous size for something from Australia. But nope, at least not yet. They did snake things that you'd expect. Slithered around, swallowed prey whole. That's all there is to it. Now we're moving on to the Pliocene mammals. And I want to start off with some of the largest ones on land at the time. Yes, the Proboscideans. We've arrived at the time where we get to talk about how Mastodons got big as fuck. I like Mastodons because first off, their name is sick. Mastodon. That's badass. When you think of Mastodons, your brain might immediately go to the Ice Age, Pleistocene. And that is fair, because that's when they went extinct. But obviously their lineage goes back way further than that. The common ancestor of the Mastodon family was alive sometime in the late Oligocene, from the last episode. And by the time the Pliocene came around, some species were massive, like Mammoth, Borsoni. They were gargantuan. They're about 13 feet tall at the shoulder and 28,000 pounds. And their tusks could get to 16 feet long, possibly the longest tusks on any animal that we know of. A beast, to say the least. It's worth mentioning that for now, their genus name Mammoth is put in quotation marks, because their fossils seem to place them in the Mastodon genus, but they're from Eurasia. The rest of the genus is from North America. As of right now, there's no evidence that Mastodons had any migration between the two continents. So, more research must be done. We have also arrived at the time of the mammoths, which were not woolly yet that we know of. Some of the earliest mammoths looked like classic elephants, such as Mammothus subplanifrons, big elephant. But they had the classic spiral twisting in their tusks that we know and love about their upcoming relative, the woolly mammoth. So that's the Proboscideans. Now we're moving on to the ungulates. Starting off with the most similar to the last, the woolly rhino. Yes, a rhino with wool. This time they are in full swing in the Pliocene. The earliest representative of this group that we know of is the Tibetan woolly rhino from, you guessed it, Tibet. Their fossils were found at an altitude of almost 14,000 feet, as you would expect in Tibet. They had a massive nasal horn, possibly used to sweep away snow to expose vegetation and eat it. And it seems like a trait that would have been passed on to their descendants, that we will talk about in the next episode. But their horns weren't shit compared to the next rhino on the list, Elasmotherium, also known as the Siberian unicorn. Pretty self-explanatory. They're estimated to have had the thickest horn of any rhino to ever exist, that we know of. There's a few different hypotheses that have been passed around as to why their horn got so gargantuan. Possibly to plow through the ground to get to underground parts of plants that they might have found more delicious. Which, dude, imagine being a mole rat, going about your day, and then this thing plows through the ground and destroys everything you've ever worked for your entire life. That would suck. Those were the odd-toed ungulates. Now moving on to the even toes. First off, I've got a giant-ass fucking camel, Titanotilopus, a North American camel that got to 11 feet tall at the shoulder and weighed up to 5,500 pounds, making them one of the largest camels to ever exist, that we know of. They had big upper canines, the classic camel hump, and a relatively small brain. Next, Kyptoceras. They look like the product of an accident with another Kyptoceras. As you would probably expect, these horns are thought to be another example of reproductive selection. It seems as though only the males had them, and males used them to compete with other males for females. Also probably made for a great weapon. That shit is gnarly. They look badass. The next one is this. Guess what they're most closely related to. Take a guess.
A few moments later.
Yes, giraffes. This is Cephalotherium, an extinct giraffe relative that was alive throughout Africa and Eurasia. They were very cool looking and also very big. But, unfortunately, like many other cool looking ungulates that have existed in the prehistoric past, they have been left in the dust in terms of research. Most recent estimates suggest they got to about 4,000 pounds. But that paper also mentioned that they didn't take larger skeletal material into account. So, they probably got even heavier than that. Cephalotherium and their relatives were alive throughout the late Miocene to the Pleistocene. And that's all for now, because next, I have another rodent to show you. Ceratogallus, a horned rodent that definitely listens to corn. Corn rodent. Their horns are perplexing. First off, they are the smallest horned mammals to ever exist. Also, they are the only rodent ever to have horns that we know of. And they're thought to have been fossorial, i.e. lived in the ground. And that is weird, because no mammals today that are fossorial have horns. That is strange. This was a groundbreaking rat. They're most closely related to mountain beavers alive today, which also live in the ground. So it all checks out. I like this one a lot. Moving on from the rats, let's get into the cats. Starting off with, boom, Dinofelis. Yes, their name means terrible cat. Similar to Machaeridus that I showed you earlier with the elongated canines, but nothing as crazy as what came later in the lineage. Their place in the cat form family tree is a bit uncertain right now. They have a very strange mix of features that could place them in the Machaerodon lineage, but also possibly within Panthera, the true big cat group alive today. Possibly something closely related. For now, it's hesitantly placed within the Machaerodons, so just know that's going on. Back in the 80s, some researchers argued that Dinofelis seemed to be a specialized primate killer, preferring the meat of our ancestors and baboons specifically. Remember, this was the time of expanding grasslands, so the hypothesis suggested that maybe early hominids went into caves for shelter and protection. That's where Dinofelis, Got him. Dragged him into caves. More recent isotope analysis suggests it preferred the classic antelope diet, that many cats enjoy today. Maybe the occasional ape, but not the predator in the next blockbuster movie that you'd expect. Alright, next up is a Megalodon that had a very exciting update very recently. Homotherium, a scimitar-toothed cat that was found all over the northern hemisphere. It existed from 4 million to about 12,000 years ago. A very successful feline-like cat. Not a feline, but closely related to the felines. They had massive, serrated canines like scimitars, robust limbs, and most recently, if you saw in the last video, a little tiny baby Homotherium cub was found preserved in ice in Russia, 3 weeks old. It is, in my opinion, the coolest discovery that was announced this year, literally just last month. It's the very first time in history that an extinct animal with no close living relatives has been able to have their actual appearance studied, rather than just a bag of bones. So, go check that out if you haven't already. Homotherium was just one of the many groups of saber-toothed cats, so let's just keep it moving along. Also, by the way, I'm thinking of doing a whole series on the history of cats and their relatives next year. When I say thinking about, I mean there's a 95% chance I'm gonna do it. So I'm keeping it kind of quick through these sections with the intention of expanding on them next year, because that only makes sense. That's the only next move for me. The logo alone without any other context. Okay. So, moving along. Remember last time I mentioned catinization, not a real term, but the cat form has prehistorically been a popular one, and expanded into groups outside of carnivora, even right outside of the placental mammals, in the group Metatheria. So, allow me to introduce you to Thylacosemilus, also known as the marsupial sabertooth. Despite their appearance, the power of the jaws of Thylacosemilus was actually pretty weak compared to the true sabertooths. It's like a knockoff. They show evidence of preferring the softer stuff, like pure meat instead of bones. Possibly had a more scavenging type of lifestyle, relying on the work put in by other predators alive at the time, like terror birds, scaring them off for the scraps. And they look like they'd get into that kind of shenanigans, you know? This is the face of tomfoolery, if you ask me. Alright, we have reached the final group of the Neogene that I'm going to introduce you to, Xenarthra, which today includes armadillos, anteaters, and tree sloths. Prehistorically, also included ground sloths and the glyptodons. A very cool group. A lot of strange components, if you ask me. Every single one of them is just a character, you know? They bring a lot to the table, and have been doing so since they first appeared early into the Paleocene, and now in the Pliocene. They have diversified and become their own within the larger group. Let's start off with the ground sloths, Megatherium specifically. You're probably most familiar with them as the giant ground sloths from the Pleistocene. In the Pliocene, they hadn't reached their largest size yet. One of the earliest representatives of this genus was Megatherium altiplanica, i.e., mini Megatherium. Relatively small, about 3,000 pounds, which is just mere pipsqueaks compared to their litter relatives that would get to like 4 times that weight. We're gonna talk about them in the next episode, but do not fret. We are not done with the sloths. There's another group that I think you will absolutely love. Thalassocnus, the water sloths. Yes, another group that went back to the water. There's 5 species that have been described so far, and they range between 250 to 650 pounds. This paper in 2014 went through the skeletal modifications they had to adapt to a semi-aquatic or aquatic lifestyle. This included osteosclerosis and pachyostosis, i.e. the thickening and densening of bones, probably to help them walk along the bottom of the aquatic floor. I think they're cute. Extinct. I like them as a concept, and as something that is extinct. I think if they were allowed today, it would freak me out. But let me know what you think. And now, last but not least, the final Xenarthrans on our lineup, the Glyptodons. The totally and completely big, badass, shelled mammals. They've been around since the Eocene, but are very popular in Pliocene and Pleistocene contexts, which is why I waited to introduce you to them now. I know my reasonings for introductions at certain times have not been standard across the board, but hey, we're just having fun here. We're just having a good time. The Glyptodons were sick. I wish they were still alive today. The largest could get to almost 4,000 pounds. They were covered in badass armor. Some later Glyptodons had tail clubs. I'm gonna talk about them next time. These are like ankylosaurs reincarnated as mammals, truly. So yeah, we're gonna pick up on them in the next episode. As you probably already assumed about the transition from this period to the next, it kind of just happened. All the prehistoric mass extinctions are over. So instead, the boundary between the Pliocene and Pleistocene epochs, or also between the 2 periods, is placed at a time that represents a gradual shift in the Earth's climate and ecosystems that happened about 2.6 million years ago. The cooling trend continued on for a fucking long time, as we have seen. And then at the Pleistocene, the glaciations became very pronounced. And that's kind of it. The boundary is really just there to help us understand Earth's history in an organized fashion. And the exact placement of it has changed over time with the development of better dating methods, new fossil evidence, etc. For example, the boundary used to be at 1.8 million years ago. Now it's at 2.6 million years ago. Science changes, and our organization of science changes too. This particular one helps us understand how our own species evolved and in what context. We are finally at the Quaternary Period, which started 2.6 million years ago. and is still happening to this day. This is the time of the saber-toothed cats and the woolly mammoths, and this is also the story of us. Throughout this series, we've explored strange specimens that looked like aliens, alive 500 million years ago, the first animals on land, and the other unusual. Now, we are at the time of our species, the predators and prey that push them to become more social, problem-solving, and curious. So, let's get the global conditions out of the way. We're gonna focus on the Pleistocene. You're familiar with the global conditions today, so let's focus on before, which, by the way, the Pleistocene is like the Ice Age epic. You're probably most familiar with it as that. The epic we live in is the Holocene. So we have Pleistocene and Holocene epics. The Pleistocene being referred to as the Ice Age is a bit misleading for a couple of reasons, thanks to Hollywood and mainstream media. The term Ice Age refers to any period in Earth's history when temperatures are cold enough to allow glaciers and ice sheets to expand. During the Pleistocene, these conditions fluctuated drastically. It was a roller coaster ride of freezing glacial periods where ice could get to a mile thick. Then it would get warmer to around the global temperatures we have today. Then boom, back into the Ice Age. And then boom, back to the warm. And the climate went back and forth this way every like 40,000 to 100,000 years throughout the Pleistocene, until a rapid warming at the end led us to our current epic, the Holocene. And I'll just say now, these natural changes are completely separate from the changes we're seeing in our climate today that are caused by humans, just so we all know what the fuck is going on. We're gonna get to that in a bit, but I will promise now that I will keep the vibes good. But like I said, the climate was bouncing around with glacial periods and interglacial periods in between. So it's worth mentioning that throughout the Pleistocene, interchanges kept happening. Remember the Great American Biotic Interchange, animal migrations across continents. So that kept happening, just keep that in mind. Everything is always in motion. Also, just like the climate of the time, we are also going to be bouncing around a little bit. There is structure, but some slight bouncing, just so you know. So now let's get into the animals of the Pleistocene, starting off with the final chapter of the terror birds, Psilopterus. Last time I mentioned the South American side of the lineage wasn't doing so hot, not far behind their relatives in the north. The youngest bones of this bird are about 96,000 years old, give or take 6,000 years. So, made it through the bulk of the Pleistocene, and then boom, a 60 million year old lineage was done so. But that is not the only large bird I have to show you. You've heard of owls. Matter of fact, you might like them a lot. If so, get this. A giant Cuban owl named Ornomegalonyx. Initially thought to be a terror bird because of its size when it was found in 1954. But then, in 1958, it got even better, i.e. is an owl. They got to about 3.5 feet tall, so not insane, but very much good friend size if you ask me. But paleo art has given them a much more sinister twist. They consistently look like something out of a fucking horror movie. Big, heinous, evil owl. But let me tell you more about it. It seems as though the size of Ornomegalonyx is the result of, you guessed it, island rule. I'm sure you already know what the fuck is going on. If not, island rule essentially means shit gets weird. The smaller an island is, the weirder it gets. The further it is from the mainland, the weirder it gets. Cuba is an island that today just so happens to be home to some of the best food on the planet. And in the past, home to giant prehistoric owls that had long and robust hind limbs and thick toes, armed with some of the most powerful claws of any owl to ever exist that we know of. We're gonna switch gears a lot and get to the elephants real quick. A couple of them. Like I said, we are bouncing around. Allow me to introduce you to Paleoloxodon, also known as the straight-tusked elephant, an absolute beefcake. They got to about 14 feet tall just at the shoulder, making them some of the largest land mammals to ever exist that we know of. Right up there with Paraceratherium, who in my heart is still the largest, but it's literally impossible to say. I think most people are on the elephant side of the argument because it seems as though fully grown Paleoloxodon bulls could have been even bigger than we have fossil evidence of based on size proportions of elephants today from a paper from 2016. Possibly 17 feet tall at the shoulder and 10,000 pounds heavier than the largest Paraceratherium individuals. But we need more bones of them, but for now, it's Paraceratherium in my heart. We need a little bit more fossil evidence for me to be convinced to go to the other side. While this genus has some of the largest land mammals to ever exist that we know of, it also has some of the smallest that we know of. Yes, this is the Sicilian pygmy elephant that lived in what is now Sicily. Fossil evidence suggests they had a stature like wiener dogs, long torso and short legs, and they evolved from some of the largest land mammals ever. So, you know where I'm going with this. Yes, island rule strikes once again. It seems as though a population of straight-tusked elephants migrated to Sicily over land bridge and eventually got isolated there when the land bridge disappeared. And they shrunk to shit over a long period of time, but it was relatively quick considering how drastic it was. From a 14-ton beast to a little guy the size of a Shetland pony. 15% of their ancestors' original weight. Depending on when exactly they migrated to Sicily, sometime between 175,000 and 50,000 years ago. This could have happened in as little as 40 generations, which is just insane. This size difference in that small of a window of time is nuts. Islands rule, you take my breath away once again. There's probably a couple other Proboscideans from the Pleistocene that you can think of right off the bat. Like I said, we're bouncing around. So for now, I'm gonna mention the most obvious for a second, get back to the rest later. The woolly mammoth, the icon of the Ice Age. They got to about 10 feet tall and weighed up to 13,000 pounds. They were found all over North America and Eurasia. These mammoths were perfectly adapted to handle colder climates with 2 layers of thick fur for insulation and smaller ears to reduce heat loss. But probably their most iconic feature is the set of tusks that could get to 16 feet long. Huge, and not for nothing. They played a big role in their lifestyle, possibly helping with defense and digging for food. Mammoths like to eat nuts, leaves, berries, fruits, twigs, a very cozy diet if you ask me. They had 4 massive molars to process this plant material. Aside from their looks, woolly mammoths are probably the icons that they are today because of their prehistoric relationship with humans. They were the muses of early cave painters in Europe, and a great source of meat and material for multiple human species, who used their tusks and bones to make tools and construct humble abodes. Probably the weirdest aspect of this relationship is the fact that you could argue it's still going on to this day. The mammoths have been extinct for thousands of years, but as you probably know, Colossal is working to de-extinct them, which is a video topic I've been putting off for far too long. This series took over my whole life, so now, after this, I'm gonna have more time to cover stuff like that. De-extinction is super controversial, but I think I'm gonna give you a unique perspective on it because I do communicate with the company a lot. I'm also on their youth advisory board, which means I hear about the projects they're working on directly from them. I'm able to give feedback on them and sometimes get involved, which is absolutely sick. The technology they're creating to de-extinct the mammoth is going to be used in a much broader range of ways. Very cool ones. So, stay tuned for that. To de-extinct an animal, you need to have viable DNA, which is obviously very hard to find in animals that have been gone for thousands of years, and cannot be done for animals that have been extinct for millions of years. By the way, Jurassic Park cannot be a thing. Anyway, scientists have been able to extract it from individuals found frozen in ice from thousands of years ago, which sounds like the plot of a movie. One of the most well-preserved mammoths found so far is named Yucca, found in 2010 in Russia. It was dated to about 39,000 years old. It was somewhere between 6 to 9 years old when it died. 6 to 9. Not 69, 629. Yucca's brain was surprisingly intact and was able to be CT scanned to compare it to the brains of African elephants. And what do you know? They were extremely similar. So they probably had a lot of the same behavior patterns, maybe able to use some level of tools like elephants can today. Another animal that's been found frozen in ice is the woolly rhino, which we talked about last time, but is definitely most known as a Pleistocene persona. I was trying to get some alliteration with that. I don't think I did a very good job. Anyway, in 2020, a woolly rhino was found in Russia. It was dated to about 32,000 years old. It had soft tissues, skin, and wool, and also a fatty hump. That was a previously unknown characteristic. That's sick, dude. The world is nuts. You have an idea based on the bones of an animal, then boom, one gets washed up from the depths of permafrost. And what do you know? It has a hump. They were found throughout Eurasia, didn't make it to North America, that we know of, and that's all on them for now. By the way, now we're in ungulates. Woolly rhino was the first one. The next two are weirdly grouped together because they were both collected by Darwin on his Beagle voyage, and they were both found in Argentina. Point for Gian. They also both had a combination of weird features that made it really difficult to place them in the mammalian tree for a while. But thanks to big tech, they were both eventually determined to be most closely related to perissodactyls, i.e. the odd-toed ungulates. They are Toxodon and Macrauchenia, the Argentinian misfits. Let's start with Toxodon, a big-bodied, hoofed mammal with a variety of traits. Darwin himself wrote, Toxodon is perhaps one of the strangest animals ever discovered. Why did he say this? Well, Toxodon had curved incisors like a rodent, eyes and nostrils further up on the skull like a manatee. It kind of looked like a cross between a hornless rhino and a hippo, and this left scientists stumped for almost 200 years. It was also once described as a giant guinea pig built like a short-legged rhinoceros with hippo-like habits. Quite a mouthful. It was thought to be semi-aquatic at one point. That ended up not being the case. But, like I said, they were determined to be most closely related to the group that includes rhinos, which checks out. And Macrauchenia. They had a different combo of unusual features. As you can see, they had a body similar to a camel without the hump, a long neck, and potentially a small trunk like a tapir or elephant. I say potentially because some scientists don't like that idea. But Macrauchenia's nasal aperture, the nose hole, sat right between its eyes instead of lower down the snout, which is similar to that of elephants and tapirs. So this placement suggests maybe a trunk, but that's the only connection. There's no soft tissue evidence, no perceived muscle attachments for a trunk. So maybe it looked more like a saiga or a moose, who knows? the case is not closed. The last few Pleistocene ungulates on the list were all just juiced the fuck up. Starting off with a hippo. Oh, I know, you're telling me hippos aren't already juiced up? That's exactly what I'm telling you. Allow me to introduce you to Hippopotamus gorgops, who got to about 2,000 pounds larger than hippos alive today. I don't think I have to paint a picture of how hellish this beast would have been on the banks of North Africa. No thank you. Next, the Irish elk. Not an elk, but a deer. The largest deer, to be exact, that we know of. They were 7 feet tall at the shoulder, and males had antlers with a span of up to 12 feet. The length of my room, just pure antler. As you would expect, the males use these massive antlers to attract the ladies. For a long time, they were used as an example of reproductive selection gone haywire, going too far in the sexy direction, and it made getting around miserable, fleeing from predators nearly impossible. And I get it, those are some sexy ass antlers, but they were so sexy it killed them. Sad. At least that was the idea for a while. They were a great example of reproductive selection in classrooms across the globe for a long time, but more recent evidence suggests their extinction was actually just caused by the shifting climate. Caused their food to disappear. And so they disappeared too, which sucks, because death by being too hot seems like the ideal way to go. All right, next, you know moose. I hate that the plural of moose is just moose. I wish it was meese. You know meese. Fuck you, grammar monster. They're massive. They're so big, and many people don't realize it. But get this, there was one even bigger alive in the Pleistocene, the broad-fronted moose. Their antlers were so big, 8 feet wide. The scientists think they would have been too heavy to use in any productive way. No fighting, no defense, just surface-level bullshit. And last, the African long-horned buffalo. Their horns spanned over 10 feet wide. Outrageous. They were initially thought to be a long-horned morph of today's Cape buffalo, but further research on their teeth and horns and geographic range determined that they are two separate species that did live alongside each other in some areas. Maybe you got confused and mated a bit. There's no direct evidence of that as of right now. We're switching gears again. We're gonna start to get into the predators of the ice, the carnivorans. Aside from the woolly mammoth, I would argue the most iconic members of the Ice Age fauna are all carnivorans. Most of them are carnivorans, and there's a shit ton of them. So let's get this show on the road. Starting off with one of my favorites, the American cheetah. When people say North America used to look like an African savanna, they fucking mean it. Despite their name, they weren't actually cheetahs. Their closest living relative is the puma, also closely related to cheetahs, but not cheetahs themselves. A bit confusing, I know. Because of this, the American cheetah has gone through the ringer, classification and reclassification over the years because of their particular mix of traits. Compared to pumas, the American cheetah had a pretty small head, long, slender limbs, and smaller canines. Seemingly cheetah things, so initially they were classified as such, in the same genus as modern cheetahs. But it turns out this was just another classic case of convergent evolution. At about 150 pounds, the American cheetah was a formidable predator. Their cheetah-like frame suggests they were perfectly adapted for pursuing prey. Across the prairies of North America, hunting pronghorns, which are fast as fuck. Turns out they made up about 40% of their diet in some areas. But also, new evidence is suggesting their habitats were more diverse than that. Some American cheetah fossils have been found in what would have been more rocky and cliffy terrain, suggesting that some of them lived a lifestyle more similar to snow leopards, hopping all over the cliffs, which is pretty sick. This cat could do it all. Now we're gonna bounce over to Europe real quick, where I can introduce you to the cave bear. Their remains have been found in, you guessed it, caves in Europe. They were thick and heavily built, getting to the size of polar bears alive today. And actually, as I'm saying this right now, I realized putting them on the list after I said predators of the ice was fucked up because these were not predators. These tanks ate plants, full-on vegans, and they must have eaten a lot of plants to stay bulked up like that. They were first described in 1794, but their remains have been found in caves for hundreds of years before that, back in the Middle Ages. Do you know where I'm going with this? Guess what people thought their skulls were? Yes, ding ding ding, the skulls of dragons. They wanted dragons so bad, and I get that. The Middle Ages were only like 20 generations ago, by the way. I looked it up because I got curious. That's kind of crazy. That doesn't feel like a lot, but the year 1500 sounds like a really long time ago. Anyway, turns out cave bears were also the muses of some early humans, which really makes you wonder what kind of stories they had about encountering them. Probably horrific ones. I'm personally glad we do not live in caves today, because they were not the only cave carnivore to look out for. Europe had cave lions too, the largest of which were some of the biggest cats to ever exist that we know of. And this time, a full-fledged carnivore that might have primarily stolen their food from other cats, like Homotherium, because they were so big. They were the head honchos. Their size let them do whatever they want, get food served on a silver platter. Aside from the fact that early humans were making art of them too, cave paintings, even some of the earliest figurines in the world. Lion Man figurine, this dates to 40,000 years ago. Cave lions are also extremely cool because of some mummies. Yes, more mummies that were found in Russia. Between 2015 and 2018, 4 cave lion cubs were found frozen in ice. One of them was named Boris, a male cub. He was dated to 43,000 years old. Another one was named Sparta, a female, 28,000 years old. Based on analyzing their teeth, both of them were 1 to 2 months old when they died. And like the Homotherium cub I mentioned last time, these cubs were compared developmentally to a modern lion cub of the same age. It seems as though cave lions developed faster than modern lions. They also had lighter fur, both likely adaptations to the colder and harsher climate of the time. And it probably won't surprise you to find out that yet another continent had their own version of a lion, and this time completely made from scratch. Take a guess. Yes, Australia. Allow me to introduce you to the marsupial lion. Not lions, but marsupials. With a pouch. Yet another classic case of convergent evolution at work. Actually, catinization at work. The marsupial lion looked like a fucking cat. It had retractable claws like a cat, and a bite force similar to, or potentially even greater than, a true modern lion. But their tail was more similar to that of a kangaroo. And their teeth alone will tell you this is not a cat. This is instead some kind of sick joke. They looked like a carnivorous rodent. Fossil evidence suggests they likely spent some time in the trees. At about the size of a modern lioness, they are the largest carnivorous mammal to ever exist in Australia. That we know of. At the same time, there was a lizard on the continent that got even bigger. We're doing a little detour into Australia real quick. This is again another bouncing around. Megalania, the largest terrestrial lizard ever that we know of. They got up to 22 feet long and weighed up to 4,400 pounds. A massive reptilian beast. And as if that's not enough, they were possibly venomous, like their modern relative, the Komodo dragon. So what kind of items were on the menu for a lizard this big? And for the marsupial lion as well? I have a couple prey species to introduce you to. So, you know, wombats, those marsupials that you just want to... So they can get pretty big. Not a lot of people realize how big they can get. They can get to almost 90 pounds, which is awesome. That is so much wombat. But now, imagine if they got to the size of a rhino. Well, you're in luck. They did. This is Diprotodon, the largest marsupial to ever exist that we know of. They could get to 12 feet long and 6 feet tall at the shoulder. And they were a beastly relative to the modern wombats and koalas. And just like most other marsupials, they had a pouch, just like kangaroos, but on a rhino-sized wombat. What an image. And speaking of kangaroos, of course Australia had a hellish kangaroo in the Pleistocene, the short-faced kangaroo. At first glance, you might think hellish is a little dramatic, until I show you their foot. Guess how many toes they had on each foot? Guess. They had one single toe on each foot. That is diabolical if you ask me. They also got to 6.5 feet tall, making them the largest hopping animal to ever exist that we know of. I love that we have that as a record. A quick little update I want to do real quick is in Xenarthra, which had Pleistocene icons like the giant ground sloths and the glyptodonts. Last time I hinted at a Pleistocene glyptodont with a weapon for a tail, Deidicarus, a 12-foot long glyptodont that had a tail club that alone could get to 140 pounds. The tail club alone, capable of delivering painful blows in ritual combat for territory and also mates. Back in 2009, researchers applied methods used in sports equipment analysis to figure out if they had a sweet spot on the club, just like a golf club or a baseball bat, which in sports is described as a spot that delivers maximum power, but produces the least amount of force in the athlete's wrist and arm, reducing the chance of injury. And they figured out that they did. And right at that sweet spot were where the largest spikes project out. Yes, evolution at work. The rest of Xenarthra, I'll do in a little bit. For now, we're moving on to a giant rodent, Castorides, a beaver that potentially got to the size of a fucking black bear. Unfortunately, as of right now, there's no evidence that Castorides got into the same shenanigans that their modern relatives did, building dams, cutting down trees, etc., which is sad. But I hope that makes you that much more appreciative of beavers alive today. We have rodents alive today that construct homes with full-on tree wood that they chop down themselves, then bring to make a house in the water, and make beaver freezers to store food for the winter. That's cool. You know what? I want to make it a goal to see a beaver dam in the flesh this year. I've never seen one, and that was my college mascot. Isn't that just horrific? I was an OSU beaver, and I've never seen a beaver dam. I don't think I've ever seen a beaver in real life. Damn. Anyway, I'm making the giant beaver out to be not shit. That's obviously not cool. A giant beaver is cool. And they also spent most of their time in the water. You know what? I am gonna say it to make a point I feel like I can't often make. These beavers weren't shit compared to the ones alive today. Beavers today are much cooler than prehistoric beavers. Take that, prehistory. Take that, deep time. One of the most captivating aspects of the Pleistocene is the evolution of our ancestors and the interactions they had with some of these prehistoric beasts. I want to introduce you to a couple other cool apes that were no homo. Starting off with the biggest of them all, Gigantopithecus, the largest ape to ever exist that we know of. I've talked about them a lot because look at them. They were twice the size of modern gorillas and weighed up to 1,000 pounds. And their discovery is very interesting. I did a whole video about it. They were found in what is now China. One of the weirdest aspects of their discovered remains is that it's a shit ton of teeth, thousands of teeth, and just a couple mandibles, nothing else. And it seems as though part of the reason is that porcupines ate the bones. They love them. They crave them. They consume them for minerals to maintain their lovely quills. That's just what they got going on in this region. But luckily, as we all very much know by now, there's a lot scientists can figure out about an animal from teeth. Gigantopithecus liked fruits and also dabbled in leaves, stems, and possibly bamboo. Throughout the about 2 million years the apes were around, over time their teeth got bigger and more complex, probably in response to the Pleistocene ice fluctuations. And those teeth are the biggest primate teeth ever found. So boom, big ass ape, King Kong IRL. Now we're moving into the hominin lineage, but not Homo just yet. Remember last time, Erica talked about Ardipithecus and then Australopithecus. During the Pleistocene, a group of hominins emerged that were unlike any others alive at the time. They were part of a genus called Paranthropus, also known as the robust hominins, because of their robust features. They had thick cheekbones and brow ridges, massive thick jaws and molars, and this bony mohawk ridge called a sagittal crest. All features that formed strong muscle attachments for a powerful bite, allowing them to chew on tough and fibrous foods like grasses, nuts, and roots, and possibly, occasionally, meat. Remember that for a second. Over 300 fossils have been found and identified as Paranthropus remains, categorized into 3 different species. Paranthropus ethiopithecus, the oldest and most mysterious of the 3, found in eastern Africa. Paranthropus robustus, who possibly used bones as tools to dig termites out of termite mounds, found in southern Africa. And Paranthropus boisei, who had the most extreme characteristics. Very large molars, very dish-shaped face, very thick dental enamel, also found in eastern Africa. Although this lineage eventually died out, it's possible they left something to carry on their legacy, and you're not gonna like it. Genital herpes, which infected the hominin lineage sometime between 3 million and 1.4 million years ago, from a chimpanzee ancestor that was alive at the same time and in the same region as Paranthropus boisei. More research is needed, but it's possible Paranthropus ate infected ancestral chimp meat and passed it to our ancestor in Homo in a similar fashion. Which brings us to our genus, Homo. Probably the most disrespectful transition I could have done. Just kind of starting off on a bad note, but it is what it is. Let me just say now, of all groups and developments we have talked about in this series, this one is the most deserving of its own spin-off. The story of how we went from worrying about bears in caves to having your biggest worry be why she's not texting you back is complex, to say the least. The fossil record has provided many answers, but is also very hard to untangle. Transitional fossils that fit in between 2 species, intersections of multiple human species, and so much of our development can't be easily understood from bones. How can we define our consciousness? What was the role of religion in early human groups? There are a lot of ideas out there, and new ones are being added all the fucking time, and I have only dipped my toes into it. And so, I'm sure I don't need to, but I'm going to reiterate. What I'm about to talk about is not even a snapshot. It's a couple pixels of our genus. If you want to go deeper into it after this video, a really good place to start is the Smithsonian's Human Origins website. They have tons of interactive tools, lots of easily digestible information. It's humanorigins.si.edu. I'm gonna put it in the description too. Now, starting off with the base of our genus in the early Pleistocene. A few things made them stand out from other earlier hominins. Obligate bipedalism, meaning they didn't spend any time on all fours. They had taller and leaner bodies, larger brains, flatter faces, and an increased reliance on culture, like tools, very simple tools like hammerstones, that were developed in earlier hominins and at this point were a key part of their ability to survive. Some of these early humans included Homo habilis, Homo rudolfensis, and our ancestor, Homo erectus. Dude, if you're trying to convince someone that human evolution is a thing and you tell them about Homo erectus, they immediately think you're fucking with them. It becomes a certified joke. I know that plenty from my TikTok comments. Is it childish? Do they have the brains of a child? Yes, but it is not helping. And it's a shame, because the reality is Homo erectus was unbelievably significant for the evolution of our genus. They first appeared about 2 million years ago in Africa and existed for over 1.5 million years. So like 5 times the amount of time that Homo sapiens have existed. By the way, during this time they learned how to control fire, allowing them to cook meat, possibly a reason why our brains got bigger. They also made more sophisticated stone tools, like an Acheulean hand axe. And they were the first hominins to migrate out of Africa. And they spread the fuck out, with populations settling all throughout this range, and eventually evolved into new species, including us, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and the Hobbit people. Let's start with the most intriguing species on the list, the Hobbit people. Their scientific name is Homo floresiensis, and they're the smallest human species to ever exist, that we know of. Hence the nickname, the Hobbit people. They were little They were small. They were 3.5 feet tall and weighed somewhere between 35 to 80 pounds. They were alive until about 50,000 years ago. All their fossil remains come from a cave on the island of Flores in Indonesia, and so they seem to be another classic case of island rule. Along with their remains, scientists have found stone tools and fossils of other animals, like pygmy elephants, which the hobbits seem to have hunted frequently, and giant rats, another island delicacy. The hobbits also probably used these tools to defend themselves against predators, like giant Komodo dragons, which might have ate them a little bit, and giant storks, who might have eaten baby hobbits. Whether or not they interacted with other human species, including our own, is unknown for now. It's been hypothesized that our ancestors were the reason for their extinction, but there is no hard evidence that they interacted at all. But that is absolutely not true for the next two species on the list. The evidence might exist in your own DNA, starting off with Neanderthals, alive until about 30,000 years ago and found throughout Europe, the Middle East, and Western Asia. They were bulkier than Homo sapiens with broad chests and more protruding foreheads, which might make you tempted to think of Neanderthals like this. They were actually a pretty advanced species that made art, cared for the elderly, and potentially had burial practices, just like our ancestors who lived with them for thousands of years, somewhere around here. And shit got weird, and now many people today have 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. There were also the Denisovans, who were found in Siberia and Southeast Asia until about 30,000 years ago, maybe 15,000 years ago, possibly. There have been very few fossils found of them, but we know a lot of them from extracted DNA. And what do you know? Shit got weird with them too. And now some people alive today have 3 to 5% Denisovan DNA. Homo sapiens obviously met these other species by migrating to shit. We originated in Africa about 300,000 years ago, possibly earlier. And some groups were on the move very soon after that. We've always been very curious explorers and continued to advance culturally over time, developing more sophisticated stone tools like spears and scrapers, and started to test out other materials like ivory and antlers. Early Homo sapiens made more personalized jewelry, made paintings and figurines to reflect the world around them, musical instruments, and our natural curiosities allowed these innovations to start snowballing in advancements. But at least 40,000 years ago, humans started fishing, and not the rod and the fishing line we know today, just yet. Probably just catching fish by hand, maybe using really simple tools. This obviously snowballed as well. They were interacting with and manipulating their environments in ways more complex than any other animals that we know. Group sizes increased, allowing for more complex social interactions, like division of labor, more sophisticated resource share, and eventually, at least 15,000 years ago, they developed a new control of the environment around them: domestication. It seems to have started with wolves. By the way, probably gonna do a more in-depth video on domestication of wolves and cats next year. But a few thousand years later, humans realized they had control over the growth of plants as well. Things like figs, grasses, squash, that are key components of lovely recipes that could be grown right in the comfort of their own backyard with the right care. The agricultural revolution was upon us, at different rates in different populations. And right around that time, the rest of the world was shifting. The Pleistocene was coming to an end, and the world was about to enter a time with more stable climate. That's right, bitches. We're at the tar pits. You say it. You say it.
Oh.
We're gonna be walking in.
Wait, I'm not ready.
Okay. All right, we're gonna go.
Wait.
You said okay. Today we're gonna check out the tar pits. Check out the collection.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. There's a man looking right at us. Who is that man? What?
Oh, that's not any man. That's Minute Man.
Oh. Yeah, it is.
Is he the point where I start running? Who would have thought that you'd have to film a walk-on shot like 4 times?
Well, now I don't know who to look at. Jesus Christ.
What's going on YouTube?
All right. That's right, bitches. We are at the tar pits with Milo. That's right, bitches. We are at the tar pits with Milo, also known as Minute Man. You know him, you love him. We are here in LA. He's here in LA.
I'm here in LA.
What the fuck?
In person, physically, right here, standing right now.
Yes.
I'm Milo Rossi in LA.
Tell us more about you, Milo.
How's it going, everybody? I am another creator here on YouTube, focusing primarily in archaeology and natural history. Lindsay and I have worked together before on some things. In fact, we both kind of had a similar trajectory starting out on YouTube and things like that, so I kind of feel, you know, that kinship there. And today, for the first time, we're actually together in person, filming at La Brea Tar Pit. So as you're seeing here, we are working on Lindsay's History of Life on Earth as We Know series, and I'm gonna be making a video focusing a little bit more on the history of La Brea Tar Pits as a whole, which will be over on my channel, which you can find at Minute Man or Milo Rossi. I'm sure there'll be a link to that somewhere.
Yes.
Yes.
We're looking at a tar pit with bones in it and liquid on top.
Bones and liquid on top. Now I'm thinking too about that.
Pause!
So Emily, how many fossils are in here? Like how many bones?
Well, so we have, we think, around 4 to 5 million fossils. Only about 600,000 of those are fully cataloged and digitized. And this is our primary range, which is like our best period section of the collection. So within here, I don't know, 500,000 to a million, maybe? I don't know.
There's just so many. Yeah, look, it's just like...
Any drawer you pull out,
Oh my God.
most of this aisle is just direwolf skulls.
Jesus.
Whoa!
There's 400 outside.
Wow.
Yeah, and you know, we have so many direwolves, we don't even keep the rest of the body in this collection. It's just
Wow. Oh my God.
That's nuts.
they're arranged by pet, right? So these are
You like that one?
I like them.
Lindsay, would you call this a bone zone?
I would definitely call this is a mega bone zone.
I think we're extinct. The direwolves? Lindsay might know that. Lindsay, why did the direwolves go extinct?
I don't know.
Come on, man.
What did you do, Lindsay?
What have you been doing?
I haven't finished research yet.
You know, here at La Brea, there's this really interesting intersection of significant climate warming that coincided exactly with the timing of rising human populations on the landscape. And we see 100% of the extinctions of these large animals in this region happening right at that time, in that like 300-year interval of really elevated fires following this 2,000-year episode of significant warming and drying and the rise of human populations.
Evolution at its finest.
That was the apex predator of then. This is the apex predator of today.
These are like saber-toothed cat ankle bones, and they're just, you know, stacked so nicely in the
It's making me like, I think I have a little OCD and it's making me so happy seeing them organized like this.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's definitely very satisfying.
Yeah.
Smile at us.
Wow.
Dude. Yeah.
Because they got stuck here, and that's the amazing thing. Like this, like a lot of museums you go to, and they have cool stuff. But it's stuff they went somewhere else and like dug it up and brought it back. Everything we have here is, with the exception of like the modern comparative collection, is like a fossil that was dug up right here in this park.
Unbelievable.
Wow, that's pretty rare for a museum.
That is.
Look at that kid on the floor.
Oh, don't film the kid. Don't film the kid.
I can't walk around there safely. I would ruin my shoes too badly. Can I touch it? Absolutely.
This is the real reason you came back to the tar pits. Yeah. That's crazy.
There he goes.
Wow, that is bizarre.
Yeah.
Wait, I want to do it too.
All right, you can do it. Nice.
Yeah, would not want to fall in that. That's
No, I think I'd get stuck in that.
this guy.
This is a Colombian mammoth.
Wow.
So our largest species of mammal that we have here at the top is the Colombian mammoth. So we have an extremely large collection. We have around 3.5 million specimens in our collection. But we only have 35 Colombian mammoth individuals. And this is a really unique and special one because of the 35 skulls that we have, this is the only one that's really yielded both tusks. You're welcome to feel here. Do you feel how smooth it is down here? Yeah, please, go ahead.
Wow, that is like.
And if you move further up the tooth, do you feel the more pronounced the ridges are?
Yeah, that's crazy.
So that's showing us wear and tear on the tooth from chewing, same as you would see on car tires or on our shoes.
Wow.
So this area has been exposed to most of the chewing, that's why it's got a smooth surface. This area still has a lot of thread on it to do the chewing. And then over here in the back, that dentine hasn't worn down yet to start exposing that.
Wow.
This is, these are his shoulder blades here. They've still got asphalt dripping out.
Oh my gosh!
Look at that. It's cool in here, so it's not very sticky, but if you put your finger on it and like leave it there for 10 seconds, the heat from your finger will start to melt it and you can like leave your fingerprint in it.
Oh wow.
But it's kind of cool.
That's just like dripping out of the bone.
Dripping, you know. These are femurs of giant sloths.
Whoa!
Like, you know, like Kaiba.
No way. Dude, what?
Oh my god! Can you guys both hit that pose? Can you just hit that? Yeah.
But our lab is a very unique lab, the only lab in the world that does asphaltic fossil preparation. We have to dissolve and soften the oil so that we can remove it from the specimen. So if you want to, I can show you over here. This is the top of a bison skull. This is usually what it looks like. You can see a little bit of that brown bone underneath it. And then this is what we call matrix. So matrix is sediment, the sand, the rocks, the pebbles, and any other biological organic material that got enclosed and encased in this preservation. And so that matrix is what we try and remove. And we do this very carefully. We use degreasing solvent called Novex 73DE. So I've just dipped it in there, and let's look at that area. And do you see what it does is it almost instantaneously liquefies the asphalt. Do you see how the tool is absorbing it and it's becoming darker and darker in color?
Wow.
It's like nail polish.
Exactly.
Yeah, really.
And we do actually use nail polish remover here in the lab as well.
That's where I wear it, right there. Wait, right here? Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's like putty. That's so
Yeah.
Wow.
You're absolutely wicked.
Wicked, bruv.
I'm ready.
Oh my god.
She's crazy. She's doing both feet. She's lost it. Are you gonna do both feet, Lindsay? Daring.
Here's all the matrix we removed.
Oh, so you keep that with it?
We keep it. And so what we do is once we finish the preparation of all these specimens that you see around you, we come back and we harvest all the matrix associated with these deposits. We then put it in a vat of solvent to remove the asphalt, and then can take it over to the microscope and sort for microfossil material over there.
This seems fake, you know? Like it doesn't seem...
Fake bison?
I don't buy it. Yeah.
I like to say when in the lab that all sizes matter. So not just Zed, which you could trip over, but also these little microfossils, the little things that if you look at it, it just looks like pieces of dirt. When you look at it under the microscope, you can see exactly what it is.
Are you sorting through the fossils?
I am sorting. This is what it looks like, right? But when you put it under the microscope, you can tell what part is sediment, what part is bone, what part goes with plants.
Wow, that's amazing.
What parts are insect parts. Wow. And then we get shells too, parts of shell as well, which gives another piece of information about this area, which is quite fascinating. Then of course there's always a part that you don't recognize.
The mystery.
So that goes here.
All right, now it's time to go. Send me back.
No!
Whoa, what a trip. And I came back with this. So sick. Let me put it. Yeah. I personally can't believe that the museum had this for sale for as little as it was. Like half the price of ones you could find online. So I'm stoked. I gotta figure out how to put this somehow into the setup. It's really big. I don't know how I'm gonna put it on the wall, but I'll figure it out. I've been looking at stuff like that for like 3 years, and now I have one, and I'm very excited. Okay, and now, after a quick detour, we have reached the Holocene epoch, which marks the end of the last ice age and the extinction of many Pleistocene megafauna. The only real difference between the animals that exist today and the ones that existed in the ice age are the ones that went extinct during the ice age. Every animal on this planet alive today was alive during the Pleistocene. Wasn't that long ago. The reason why the woolly mammoths and the woolly rhinos, the saber-toothed cats, the glyptodonts, etc. went extinct is generally thought to be due to either climate change, disrupting resources at the time, or the arrival of Homo sapiens to a region or a weird mix of both. To keep it simple, we're gonna leave it at that. But the Holocene also marks the start of human development in a new direction, with the emergence of agriculture for hundreds of millions of years. Actually, no, more than that, for billions of years. An organism's environment has shaped the organism itself and its species lineage. And while yes, that organism, in turn, shaped the environment around it, it only did so to the extent that the environment allowed it to. The carrying capacity, the checks and balances of nature. The agricultural revolution was the first time the control has been flipped, ever, in the history of life that we know of. Homo sapiens suddenly had the power to manipulate their surroundings and create a fully regenerative food supply, which means the carrying capacity for us was starting to dissolve. And the checks and balances didn't necessarily apply. Agriculture made life a lot more comfortable and stable, very cozy to an extent. So our understanding of community and social structure completely changed. Our populations were beginning to rise, and we continued to find new ways to use our environment to our benefit. Societies turned into civilizations, which evolved culturally in really unique ways. Some civilizations turned into empires, which had control over even more resources, on a scale the world had never seen before. And now this becomes a whole different topic. This becomes a history class rather than biology or paleontology class. That is personally not my thing. So now I can think of two ways to go through this epic: human developments, empires, etc., or animals I haven't introduced you to yet that went extinct during the Holocene. I think you already know what the fuck I'm gonna pick. But you know what? I'm gonna do a tiny little mix. I'm gonna do them in chronological order and say one very generic thing about what humans were up to at the time that each animal went extinct, for context. I might be a little off on the human timeline, it's not my thing, but I'm gonna do my best. Let's get into it. Alright. While many of the giant ground sloths met their demise around the time of the end of the Pleistocene, a couple species held on for another few thousand years. Allow me to introduce you to Megalodon, a giant ground sloth that existed in Cuba until about 4,800 years ago. We're in the hundreds now. Fuck. During this time for humans, Bronze Age was in full swing. Stone was out. Bronze was in. The pyramids of Giza were starting to be built around this time, as well as Stonehenge. Another animal that went extinct during this time was Myotragus, also known as the mouse goat, that lived on Majorca in the Mediterranean Sea. And this is yet another case of shit getting weird as fuck on islands. The islands Myotragus inhabited seem to have been free of predators, which gave them the opportunity to go creative mode on evolution. They developed more forward-facing eyes, typically a predator thing, extremely unsettling on the mouse goat. They also developed low gear locomotion. They moved very slow, really no running or jumping, or any urgency at all. As a lifestyle, don't need it. They also had reduced structures in their brains associated with sound, smell, and sight. Don't need them. But that didn't come in handy when the first Homo sapiens arrived on the islands, which seems to be the cause of their demise. Continuing our journey to the Holocene, we're gonna go to another island, the much bigger island of Madagascar. Between the years of 0 to 1000 CE, we are now in the Common Era.
Is loving Jesus legal yet? No.
Obviously, throughout the years 0 to 1000, a lot of shit happened for humans. For example, Jesus. Quite a big impact on religion. The Roman Empire, the Middle Ages, medieval Europe. For Madagascar specifically, this was a time of visitors. Lots of them, mainly from Africa and Austronesia. They came in contact with a very cool group of animals that combine qualities of two fan favorites alive today. Do you like sloths? How about lemurs? Well, allow me to introduce you to the sloth lemurs. I am pissed they're not alive anymore. These primates had it all. Faces like sloths, bodies like lemurs, and all different sizes, different lifestyles, with groups like Mesopropithecus that were about the size of lemurs today. Archaeoindris, they got to the size of a gorilla. A lemur, the size of a fucking gorilla, dude. There was also Paleopropithecus, which had hook-like hands and feet, so definitely lived a life in the trees instead of the ground. All differently adapted to go after the same kind of diet: fruits, leaves, and seeds. It seems as though these human visitors were the reason for their demise. Cave paintings discovered in 2020 show sloth lemurs being hunted by dogs and people. There are some bones that even show cut marks that seem to have been left by weapons. A couple other animals that went extinct in the region at the time: Megalodon, also known as the koala lemur. Their feet looked like those of a koala, designed for climbing rather than leaping or walking like other lemurs. Also, the giant aye-aye, 2.5 to 5 times bigger than aye-ayes alive today. It seems like their teeth were used as jewelry, which I'm honestly shocked by because aye-ayes to me scream bad omen. If you're gonna think of an animal as a bad omen, you know? I don't think they're bad omens, just to be clear. I like them and respect them very much. I just think it's interesting that they saw them and wanted their teeth as jewelry. Feels a little bit heinous. There was also a very large flightless bird that was alive in Madagascar, the elephant bird. Very fitting name, very straightforward, to the point. They were fucking massive. The largest got to 10 feet tall and over 1,600 pounds, making them the heaviest birds to ever exist that we know of. They went extinct sometime between the years 1200 to 1700, likely due to habitat loss, possibly a disease from chickens. A similar bird was alive until around a similar time, but this time in New Zealand. Allow me to introduce you to the moa, who had legs like nobody's business and lost their wings entirely. No wings at all. The largest were about the size of an average elephant bird, 6 feet tall, and range in size from 40 to 500 pounds. Very wide range. Also, with their necks fully stretched out, they could reach foliage about 12 feet off the ground. Very slinky. And like I said, they had no wings. Zero. Not even vestigial wings. They went places Carnotaurus could only ever dream of. But unfortunately, the life histories that made these birds the icons they were is part of the reason they couldn't survive. They reached their size by growing slowly over their long lifespans. Gave birth to very few babies. Two factors that make it very difficult to repopulate in desperate times. Around the year 1200, a population of Polynesians settled in New Zealand. Saw the moa as a convenient way to feed their group. Understandable. But within just 300 years, this massive bird, which initially had a population of like 58,000 individuals on the island, had been completely wiped out. Around this time, many other groups of people were exploring the world in historic, but also destructive ways. Spanish conquistadors were expanding their territories in the Americas. Christopher Columbus, etc. There were also new understandings of our place in the universe. Galileo, Copernicus. Our planet revolves around the sun. Also during this time, the wild ancestors of modern cattle were becoming increasingly rare. The aurochs, absolutely massive beasts that were first domesticated over 10,000 years ago. They got to about 5.5 feet tall at the shoulder and were found all throughout Europe. Males had huge, forward-curving horns, which make me question how the fuck they domesticated them in the first place. When they reached their lowest numbers, Europeans turned them into a symbol of royal privilege for hunting. By the year 1627, the last few were hunted to extinction. This is another animal on the de-extinction list, by the way. The scientists actually started working on like 100 years ago. Today, the biggest group working on this is the Taurus program in the Netherlands. Their method is called backbreeding, where they crossbreed domestic cattle with characteristics similar to aurochs in hopes of creating auroch-like creatures to reintroduce into multiple rewilding sites across Europe. The next one on the list is actually one of the biggest icons of extinction and the de-extinction efforts. The dodo, the beloved laid-back bird that lived on the island of Mauritius until the 1600s. They got to about 3 feet tall and 40 pounds, and lived carefree on the island where they didn't have any natural predators. They were slow-moving, unsuspicious. As you can probably already guess, this made them very easy targets for sailors that arrived in the 1500s. These sailors also introduced rats, pigs, and monkeys that fucked up the paradise the dodos were used to. And all of this combined turned them into probably one of the most devastating cases of recent extinctions. But like I said, they are on Colossal's de-extinction list. So I'm going to talk about that plan when I do the Colossal video, so stay tuned for that. Also, notice how I have plans for after this series is done. I know a lot of you are upset that the series is over, but I got plans, bitch. I'm not going anywhere. During this time, up in the north, near Russia, lived the Steller sea cat, a giant relative to the dugong that got to about 30 feet long and 20,000 pounds. They were very big and very cute, and lived in shallower waters, kind of like manatees today. They were first discovered in 1741 by George Steller, hence the name Steller sea cat, and he studied them by himself until they went extinct only 27 years later. During that time, he noted they were really social, living in small family groups that vocalized through heavy breathing sounds and sighs. They like to eat kelp and seagrass and use their prehensile upper lip to help them grab at it. Around the time that they were hunted to extinction, there were many wars and other depressing shit. And I know this video is getting a little depressing as well. There's a few more I want to introduce you to, and you can safely assume humans are the reason they went extinct. I don't want to keep repeating that. The Great Auk, alive until 1844. A few years before the California Gold Rush, and also around the time the word dinosaur was invented. They were like the penguins of the north. Flightless birds alive from the North Atlantic, from like Canada all the way to Denmark, potentially to the west coast of Russia. They're about 2.5 feet tall and lived lifestyles similar to penguins, diving to eat fish and thriving in the cold. They were actually the inspo for the common name penguins of the South have today. They're not related, it was just inspo. The Great Auk belonged to the genus Penguinus. Birds in Antarctica looked like Penguinus, hence the name penguins. Another cool bird, the Haas eagle. Originally thought to have gone extinct about 700 years ago, but potentially existed until 1860. Let me explain. They were the biggest eagles to ever exist, that we know of, with wingspans of 8 to 10 feet long. They were apex predators in New Zealand, and are thought to have even been predators of the moa, even the big ones, which is nuts, swooping down from trees or cliffs to catch and kill their prey with their powerful talons. They were first described in 1871 as an extinct bird. Like I said, extinct for like 500 years at that time. But in the late 1860s, a European explorer named Charles Douglas shot 2 large hawks, which fit the description of the later described Haas eagle. Did Charles Douglas shoot the last 2 Haas eagles before they had even been discovered? Probably not, but you never know. And another cool bird, the passenger pigeon. They're found all throughout eastern and central North America. Kind of looked like mourning doves alive today. You know, the ones that have those lovely calls in the morning that probably remind you of walking to school. I have a view of a lovely tree outside, and they like to sit in it. It's their favorite place to sit. so I see them all the time. I'm very happy about it. The passenger pigeon kind of looked like them, a little bit bigger, and a lot more abundant. Abundant is an understatement. It's thought that a few hundred years ago, their species alone made up 25 to 40% of the total bird population in the United States. 3 to 5 billion individuals with a B. Absolutely nuts. So as you would expect, they had a huge impact on their ecosystems. They would nest in colonies of millions of birds, taking up like 10 square miles of space, and that was just the typical. One of the larger sites was thought to be about 850 square miles in Wisconsin, and was thought to have about 136 million birds. They were North America. If the world was a dictionary and you went to North America, the picture of it would have been the passenger pigeon. They went extinct in 1914. I don't think I have to paint a picture of how it went down. But considering how many there were and how quickly their numbers crashed, they kind of became a poster child for the need for conservation laws. That became the silver lining of this extinction. More people became really strong advocates for wildlife conservation at the time. And because of this, countless other species have been protected since then. I have one more I'm going to introduce you to, or I guess reintroduce you to, because I'm sure they don't need an introduction. The thylacine, also known as the Tasmanian tiger, a carnivorous marsupial that went extinct in 1936. Another weird-ass marsupial, dude. It had its own copycat version of another carnivorate. This time, looks like a dog, but still off in that marsupial way we know and love. Here are my thoughts on them. They shouldn't be extinct, but they look extremely prehistoric to me. If I knew nothing about them, and someone showed me an artist's reconstruction of them, and asked me to guess what time period they existed in, I would probably assume Eocene, Miocene. They're giving Hyaenodon. They're giving weird 30 million years ago. But they went extinct less than 100 years ago, and there is actual video footage of them. Rather than focus on their extinction, I want to talk about what we know about their existence, like we have with all the prehistoric animals throughout this series. Despite looking like a dog drawn by someone attempting to draw for the first time, the thylacine was really cool. They had those half-erased stripes across their backs, hence the name Tasmanian tiger. And just like other marsupials, they had pouches, and not just the females, males too. That's pretty unusual, but they weren't used the same way. Females had them to carry their joeys, males had them to protect their reproductive organs. For the males, it was a pseudo pouch. In sources from the 1800s, there's a couple times authors have kind of implied that the thylacine could periodically hop like kangaroos, using the word bound. In 1835, Henry Melville noted that when running, the thylacine bounds like a kangaroo, though not with such speed. Another author wrote, it has some of the peculiarities of the kangaroo, for it proceeds by bounds. What the fuck did bound mean? Kind of implies kangaroo hopping, but later studies of their anatomy don't show any ability to do that. Maybe it meant something else, maybe more like a bunny. Who knows how much lead poisoning was fucking up their perception of reality back in the day. Despite slanderous rumors back in the day of drinking blood and hunting livestock, it seems as though the thylacine preferred smaller prey. Bandicoots, patamelons, and other Australian named things of that nature. They were ambush predators that hunted at night, relying on sight and sound for hunting more than smell. They were absolutely darling. I hope we get to see them with our own eyes if the de-extinction technology works, which is going to be used in many ways, reworking it to focus on endangered species and the crises that we face with the mass extinction today. Because yes, we are facing a mass extinction. You might be tempted to turn this video off now, but do not move a muscle. You're not allowed to leave yet. I'm not ending this series on a bad note, I promise. Just give me a chance, hear me out. Also, I want to give a shout out to my friend Heidi, who's a climate activist. She helped me figure out the right way to end this video. Many thanks to her, and go check out her channel. Humans are obviously very special evolutionarily. We've created tools and technology that no other being has been able to, ever, that we know of. We've figured out how to create energy using stored carbon that existed in life forms that were alive in the deep past. The remains of plants and animals that we've talked about in this series were buried, and with heat and pressure over millions of years, became coal and oil, and so on. And we figured out how to tap into it and use it to advance. Objectively, that is fucking cool. For the health of the carbon cycle, not so cool. Carbon is the backbone of life on Earth. You're made of carbon. Your dog is made of carbon. Your plant and the mold you can't get rid of, made of carbon. It's stored in mountains and is occasionally released via erosion and weather, then seeps into the soil. It is also released into the atmosphere from the oceans and plants and microbes. That's the carbon cycle. Shit cycling around. And the burning fossil fuels fucked it all up. But when it happened, we didn't know. All we knew is it was allowing us to advance, survive in places that would not normally be survivable. And in that growth, we flew too close to the sun and released a lot of nasty shit in the atmosphere that didn't need to be there. Now it feels too big to tackle. The story of this epic is the development of us, which has been unbelievable compared to everything else we've talked about in this series. But it's had a lot of downsides. Like any natural ecosystem, all of our human activity is intertwined. Fossil fuels being pumped into the atmosphere, expanding society into natural habitats, moving animals around to places they shouldn't be, etc., etc., etc. These systems have been developing for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And now, for the first time in the history of life on Earth, that we know of. We are given the task to fix it. That is an extremely heavy weight to carry. That feels almost impossible. It doesn't help that a lot of the coverage on this topic is shit is getting really bad, we need to fix it. And then boom, curtains close, show is over. That would make anyone feel completely hopeless and shut down and try to avoid talking about it, and that's understandable. I think what we need is a shift in perspective. I have realized, especially in the last couple weeks, that sometimes when a problem feels too big to fix, and the steps you have to take to fix it feel too much to take on, all you have to do is try reordering the steps, reordering the priorities, when sometimes that's just not possible. The problems intertwined with this mass extinction and our changing climate are huge. No one person can take them on, but they are built by smaller units that are much easier for one person or one group of people to tackle. Let me give you a couple examples. Of course, I'm going to start with the Cheetah Conservation Fund, which was founded by Laurie Marker in Namibia in 1990 to help save the cheetahs from extinction. Most wild cheetahs alive today are in Namibia. And like many animals, the reasons for their decline are complex, include human-wildlife conflict, habitat loss, human settlements expanding into their territory, farmers shooting them to protect their livestock, people illegally trafficking them to be sold as pets in other countries, thornbush habitats taking over open grasslands that cheetahs need to thrive. That all feels like a tangled mess, but CCF has managed to find a solution for all of those problems over time. To tackle the issues of farmers shooting cheetahs to protect their livestock, they started raising Anatolian shepherds to be livestock guarding dogs. Boom. Cheetahs are naturally afraid of any predators larger than them, so they choose flight over fight. So CCF raises those dogs, brings those dogs to farmers near cheetah territory, and the dogs are able to protect the livestock by scaring away the cheetahs. Nobody gets hurt. It's a win-win. For illegal trafficking, they work with the Namibian government and have a location in Somaliland, which is a big hub for the export of cheetahs, to stop the traffickers before they take them out of Africa. Then they care for all these rescued cheetahs and release them back into the wild through a very lengthy behavioral process whenever it's possible. And for the thorn bush, they created a new business model. Harvest a thorn bush out in the wild and process it into a high heat, low emission, compacted log that can be used as fuel. This restores the grassland habitats, provides a whole new job market in Namibia, and provides another source of sustainable energy for the region. Sick. And all of these programs, which are just the surface level of what CCF works on, have been able to stabilize and even started to increase the cheetah population in different regions in Namibia. That is fucking sick, dude. People identify solutions to problems and then continue to build more solutions to those problems, and it adds up. And there are people doing these kinds of projects with different focuses and different scales all around the world. Another one, the hole in the ozone layer. Back in the 70s, people used a lot of aerosols, and then we figured out it was creating a hole in the ozone layer. That is a bad hole. The ozone layer is important, protects us from UV. Countries came together and created the Montreal Protocol in 1987, and now the hole is shrinking, and it will be completely shrunk in the coming decades. I know it feels like people don't get shit done a lot of the time, but we do. We get a lot of shit done. Humans have really been altering their ecosystem since the agricultural revolution, like we talked about before. And over time, the scale and severity of our impact has increased exponentially. But shit was going business as usual. We had no idea until like a little over 100 years ago. We're figuring shit out. One thing about our species is we are very good at adapting and innovating. We are inventors. There are solutions to these problems happening all around us, and they are completely accessible for you to be a part of. You don't have to create a new source of energy to change the planet. You don't have to save a species from extinction. Look at your community. Look at the lakes or ponds nearby. I know it sounds cliche, but genuinely, change happens there. Shit got bad starting in those small communities, and that's how you make it better, is starting in those small communities. I guarantee there are ecology groups or conservation groups nearby that you can volunteer with. And maybe they're not totally in line with what exactly you want to work on, but it might send you in directions you can't even imagine right now. I 100% credit my desire to start learning about the world and eventually teaching to my time at CCF, which I found out about by volunteering at a wildlife rescue near my college. The world works in really weird ways. Getting involved that way locally could also give you a whole new community to be a part of. That's really nice. One thing these fires has made me realize firsthand is that we function really well as a community that has a common goal. The support for victims of the fires was felt throughout the city almost immediately. Shelters have been turning away donations because they received so much more than they needed. Places were overflowing with people wanting to volunteer to help in any way they could. We really care about each other and show up for each other. We have our flaws. There's no denying it, but we are a very cool species. Yes, we have done some serious damage, but we've also realized that we're doing it in the first place. And we've learned so much about our planet. No other species knows this much about our planet that we know of. And we know about our deep past. That's nuts. And that collective knowledge and our continued desire to learn has allowed me to create this series to present to you wherever you are in the world and make us feel connected while doing so. So, thank you for watching. Creating this series has truly been one of the most unbelievable experiences of my life. I am so grateful to have been able to do it, and I'm so grateful that you have been along for the ride. In the intro to this series, I mentioned that learning about the history of life on Earth has helped me with my own existential anxiety. Understanding where we came from really helps me feel comfort in not knowing where our planet is going. There's a chance you resonated with that, and so, if you made it this far into the video and this series, I have a little secret to share with you. Before I ever started making long-form videos on this channel, I used it to upload videos of songs that I wrote. This channel is very old, but using it for animal content is new. Once I switched the theme, I privated all of them, and I totally forgot until a couple weeks ago that I had uploaded a video of a song I wrote about my existential anxiety when I was 19. It's called Bring Me Peace, and I still play it on my guitar a lot. It's one of my favorite songs I've ever written. It's really short, but I decided to make the video unlisted so you can watch it if you have the link, which I put at the very bottom of this video's description. Once you click on the link, the lyrics are included in that description in that video. Thinking about that song and the lyrics and where I'm at now, especially after finishing this series, it's crazy how dramatically my mindset has shifted since learning about evolution and finding comfort in that. Pretty much every line of that song does not feel true for me anymore. So I guess I wanted to share it with you because, one, I wanted to show you some of my music, and two, maybe it'll provide comfort if you are struggling right now. I wrote that song 8 years ago, and since then, I've found this passion in the natural world and learning more about it. And it has fundamentally changed my life for the better. The world is constantly changing, and we are constantly changing too. Our mindsets will never be stagnant, and that is really cool. So what now? Now that the series is over? Well, things are gonna continue business as usual. I'm gonna take a little break, like 2 or 3 weeks, because while I did love making this series, it did take a lot out of me. But I'm setting it up so you don't really notice a big gap. It's not gonna be noticeable at all. And now, we're just gonna keep talking about a lot of cool shit. Cool prehistoric species that should be expanded on. Cool species alive today. Heinous, disgusting creatures. All the usual shit. I've mentioned a couple series I have in mind. The history of cats. Maybe the history of rats. A de-extinction video. Other things that I would love to hear your suggestions on. And I definitely wanna start traveling more. Going to sanctuaries like CCF that are doing really cool work, but also just traveling for fun. Maybe I'll go visit some national parks and camp for a bit and film random shit while I'm out there that has nothing to do with the national parks. I was kind of thinking it might be fun to like bring something like this. Like I can work remote, so I can just go somewhere and set this up. Maybe do a video about anglerfish while I'm in Yosemite. I don't know. We'll see. I have plans. And now, if you didn't have it before, this series kind of gives you like a prerequisite collection of information to keep in mind as we talk about Paraceratherium, Opabinia, any animals alive today. Now you kind of have some idea of their deep history. I hope you're excited, because I am too. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of it. Check out my Patreon to keep up with behind the scenes updates in our Discord server. And for now, stay curious. The world has a lot for us to learn. See ya!